Hello, everyone, and welcome to the newest episode of Educational Lounge. I'm Heartless, and I'm joined, as always, by CavalierGuest. And tonight, we have a special guest. Tonight, we're going to be joined here by ishb00 from HeroesHearth eSports, and we'll be talking with him about tanking in Heroes of the Storm. And I don't think there's a better question to open this episode than the obvious one. What is tanking in Heroes of the Storm? Cav, if you will, with your permission, let's begin with your answer.
I mean, it's a really complicated question, but tanking in general, I think, throughout the history of video games has just meant someone who stands there and absorbs a bunch of damage, which is weird because that's not what tanks did traditionally in warfare. But in Heroes of the Storm, I think it's a little more complicated, especially with the introduction of Octalysis and a couple other teams are now playing Zool as a main tank. In my mind, tanking has come down to the point where it's the ability to engage for your team and the ability to survive doing so. And that's like the specific tool you need to be a tank. But apparently there's a lot of different ways of getting there. And it's become very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned, obviously, justing. Like, a lot of the as I kind of said in the pre-production, Justin kind of opened a Pandora's box on NA, and everyone kind of had to stop and think of like, what exactly are we picking a tank for? Why are we picking a tank? And I kind of narrowed it down to roughly 3 to 4 things of like what the tank, his job in the actual team composition. The first one is to kind of, as you mentioned, literally just be a health bar. This is relevant like on, say, Volskaya. You need someone to stand on the objective when you're capturing a contested objective. You need someone that can stand there and that if the enemy focuses, either can survive it by himself or can get heals pumped into him, like big enough health bar. Sometimes you do just need that. Then second thing is obviously, as you just mentioned, engage. The ability to lock down people or set people up for your team. The third is kind of a subcat, like almost the same thing, which is basically peel, or the ability to stop people from it's basically the lockdown thing just on the reverse. You're not engaging on the enemy team to force them to stay. You're engaging on the enemy as they engage on you to stop them from going. It's I don't know. It's a little bit weird and frankly can be put in the same category as the category 2 with me. And then the fourth is usually more in competitive than anything else, which is vision granting. And this is mostly because tanks are significantly safer than other heroes. Like Murden for the longest time was one of the hardest to kill heroes in the entire game because unless you could lock him down and interrupt his jump, you were just never getting through that massive health bar plus a mobility tool. So those were kind of the 4 things a tank got broken down to, at least in my mind, over the course of this past month. So that's kind of where I am at with what's a tank.
And we've seen some deviations from that list in pro play, but they always come with specific advantages. When Johanna had like really amazing wave clear and Medivh came out, people would be like, well, let's draft Johanna for wave clear and draft Medivh for vision. And then Johanna would just rotate around between lanes.
And now you're starting and now you're starting to think about what we've been thinking about for the past month in NA.
Right. So those are like conceptually, those are the specific things that a generalist tank in a composition will always be able to do.
That is,
but you can break down drafts to find those individual tools that are not on warriors, which is so interesting to see that stuff happen in competitive play.
So I mean, and that's where we're at. I'll try and go into it as much as I can without spoiling anything, obviously. But the reason you are seeing some of these other tanks is because people realized, wait, maybe some other heroes can do some of these aspects of tanks do better, and then you can replace those aspects that hero doesn't do very well with others. For example, Zool Medivh was something Octalysis ran. The reason for this is basically, as you just described, Zool doesn't have the health bar to stand on objectives very well unless he's like getting actively supported, which Medivh covers, so Medivh covers that weakness. And Medivh gives vision, even better than any tank could. So at that point, what is Medivh lacking in his role? Well, he's lacking wave clear and CC. So what does Zool provide? Wave clear and CC. So where Zool fails as a tank, Medivh captures, and where Medivh fails as a range damage, Zool makes up for. Hence the symbiotic relationship you've seen.
That's actually fantastic breakdown that the two of you just did, because this actually fits exactly what we were talking about last time, Cav, when we did the role breakdown. We are not looking at specific heroes per se, but rather the things they can fulfill. And if you can combine two heroes to fulfill certain roles, then all of a sudden you can, get out of it with a Zul tank. So I actually really like the way you described it, ishb, with the Medivh and Zul synergy. It was actually really fantastic to hear that. That's really good.
I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that, like, in the case of Justing and some of the things other teams have been doing, I don't think every idea has been like spot on. Some of them have been throwing things at the wall and hoping they stick. But the Zul Medivh was probably the first thing Octalsis ran that really made people like me wonder, maybe this isn't just Justing really not wanting to play the tank role. Maybe they're actually onto something.
Well, we've seen a couple of clever comps historically. Heroes of the Shield at Gold Club. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but it was a Zarya main tank on Tomb with a Medivh, and it was Noblesse playing the Zarya. And literally all he did was stand so far forward that the enemy team was forced to either ignore him completely or take structure damage. But then if they didn't ignore him completely, he got portaled out. And this happened for 20 straight minutes, and eventually everything died.
Yeah.
It is amazing. And so we were talking about these roles. We really should be focusing on tools and responsibilities. It's something we went over in the drafting episode as well. It's really easy to understand your draft once you understand what individual tools you need to make a composition work on a map. And it's like, and why do we think of certain warriors as tanks and not others, right? It comes down to the reliability of their engage is the primary thing.
I mean, obviously what I just discussed is probably more relevant in competitive than in standard HL play, or even for most. Obviously, as much as you get some weirdness with this type of stuff, I wouldn't suggest people trying to force this weirdness on your HL games, especially with people that aren't familiar with what you're doing. My HL games still are run with a standard tank, and I mean, it still functions very well. And if you even saw a little bit of the playoffs this weekend, I mean, just because people are having these thoughts doesn't mean they're always the most optimal setup for these things.
And you kind of answered my next question, which would be like, what are we expecting from a tank to do? So we can actually jump to the next one, and kind of you touched about this, and without talking about Zul, because we're going to be talking about Zul later. Yeah, we're going to have a whole segment about him. Within the hero pool of the game, oftentimes there's a lot of confusion about who can be a tank. Right? Some people, some of the more popular names that come up from time to time is like Arthas. Can he be a tank? Sonya, can she be a tank? Can Dehaka be maybe you can tell us, at least from the current hero pool, who do you think can be a tank? And without talking about Zul, maybe you have ideas for heroes that are currently not considered as tank, but can potentially maybe be played as a tank in the future.
All right. So I actually... I was writing something and I haven't published it yet, so I'll try to work on that eventually. But I have actually a list of all the heroes which I consider tanks by my own definitions, and they are as follows: Anubarak, Muradin, ETC, Diablo, Garrosh, Johanna, Stitches, Taunt Varian, Arthas, and Blaze.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a weird... a lot of people may not agree with me. So I'll just cover the two controversial things in that. First of all, Arthas and Blaze as tanks. I think a lot of people have traditionally considered them more as a bruiser role. But when you break down what their playstyle is and what I've kind of just described, I very much consider them more as tanks. The fact that they have even when Blaze was like a huge offlaner before this rework, like the best offlaner in the game on release, I still considered him a offlane tank. Because let's be honest, it's just because someone's in the offlane doesn't mean they're not a tank. Like ETC Stage Dive was offlane for a while. You saw a lot of players playing this. I remember Bad Benny pulled this out a while back when he was playing the offlane. So you can still just because someone's offlane doesn't mean they're not a tank. Blaze has a lot of those properties I described. He has decent engage. He can peel pretty well. Bunker is one of the best ways of peeling in the game. He has tools to get vision, and he has a big enough health bar to sit there and take damage. What he doesn't do as a bruiser is, I mean, he doesn't provide a ton of solo threat, which is, you know, something that you're expecting from bruisers. And I can go into a whole list of like what differentiates those if really wanted, but I feel like that's something that is akin for both Arthas and Blaze, unless I think Arthas can be built into the bruiser. Obviously, the auto attack style with the level 1 quest count, I think, kind of is a more bruiser play style. But I think at the core, both these heroes are tanks. Both of them can be played as main tanks. Zugrug beat me to the punch of playing Blaze main tank on this current patch. I think Blaze is a main tank on this patch and not an offlaner personally. But that's just that. So, and then the other one that people are going to, if you noticed, I did not say Tyrael.
Yeah, I
Tyrael
did
in my
notice.
mind is a bruiser, not a tank. And the only thing that makes him playable as a tank are his heroics. Tyrael's heroics are, for lack of a better term, just godlike. Tyrael's heroics are two of the strongest heroics in the game. Judgment would be insane if it was on any other hero and wasn't competing for spot with Sank. Like, the two heroics are incredible, and so when it comes to engage, Tyrael's Sank can function as engage, peel, counter engage. The sky's the limit. Now, usually you partner Tyrael with someone else who can hard engage for him. Something like, say, Simplicity's had a lot of success with Tyrael and Maiev together. And the reason for that's pretty obvious. Tyrael's big thing is he doesn't have that engage CC, but he's really good at enabling someone else to engage. So he sets up a Maiev and basically turns the Maiev into the main tank. So Tyrael, no matter how you slice it, has a bruiser play style. He's either harassing backline or he's playing the sort of more supportive role where he's setting other people up to engage. He himself isn't really a tank because he doesn't, like, no part of his kit really peels well, no part of his kit really engages that well. He's obviously safe enough to grant vision, and he's an okay health bar, but he's actually one of the squishier tanks when you look at it. So really, Tyrael to me is a bruiser that functions as a tank in the right situations rather than a tank by himself.
Fantastic.
No, that makes a lot of sense, because when we're talking about like Tyrael's advantage is we're talking about CC. CC, roots, stuns, whatever, basically reduces the movement speed of a particular enemy to 0 for a fixed duration of time.
Yes.
So you want him to 0 their movement speed. Tyrael, the fact that he can speed your entire team up functions as, like, assuming mechanically you can, you know, hit your skill shots and take advantage of that movement speed, like, that's his engage mechanic, and that's much worse.
Well, it's like,
than other tanks, like, engage mechanics. Unfortunately, other than Judgment, he doesn't have a really good engage mechanic, but he just enables people so well that sometimes it doesn't matter as long as you're enabling the right kind of composition.
I mean, Tyrael's another case where you draft him and he fulfills roles outside of the tank role, so you need to draft someone else to fulfill what he lacks in your composition. Hence why I mentioned the Maiev Tyrael synergy. Like, that's a case where Maiev fills in what Tyrael doesn't have, which is the ability to make people stay and fight. And once you've made them stay and fight and you've popped Sank, then you put the enemy in a no-win situation.
All right. So it's amazing you're talking about Tyrael actually is the last example, and the synergy he has, and you know what makes him lacking the ability to fulfill the role of a tank, and that kind of makes the jump into the Zul talk that I want to do kind of natural, because Zul also is kind of not the usual hero you'd look at and you'd think about, hey, he can be a tank. Actually, if I remember correctly, Mopsio had a tweet a few weeks ago, or maybe a few days ago, where he was complaining about how nobody in Hero League lets him play as a Zul tank. He suggests his Hero League teammates, let me tank as Zul, and they threaten to report him. So he just cannot practice it there. So maybe you can expand a bit about Zul, and again, why does he all of a sudden work? Like, what changed? Because Zul has been in the game for quite some time. What changed?
Oh gosh. All right. Well, first to address Mopsio's pain, I fully feel that you cannot play Zul main tank in HL. No one will let you. They will. No one knows what you're trying to do, and that hero is like quick match practice or competitive or scrim practice. Like, only it's hard to get any value out of him in HL. But what really changed is it's a couple things. So the first one is obviously a topic that's actually been complained about by a lot by the pros recently, which is armor stacking. Now, for those of you who do not know, they've been slowly introducing tools to give other people armor into the game, starting with Uther, who now gives 15 armor on other things. And if you'll remember back when Blessing of the Ancient Kings was a thing, giving someone 75 armor for a few seconds is enough to break the game by itself. Now, none of the tools they've given in a vacuum are particularly overpowered. Like Urel's armor giving talent number 4 at level 4, Aegis of Light, like it's not broken in a vacuum, but where it really shines is when you combine it with other tools that give armor or other tools that give resistance, and they've been slowly kind of bloating this category. Tarant now gives spell armor. Whitemane's ultimate heroic gives 40 armor. So for those of you who don't know, if your team just stands in the same place, you Urel jump onto yourself, you Aegis, Scarlet Aegis is I believe the name of her heroic.
Mm-hmm.
Your team now has Hardened Shield, which, is insane to think about. So armor stacking increases the effective health of any character in the game, and this also applies to heroes that give themselves armor. For example, Raynor, his level 4 talent, Fight or Flight, gives himself 25 armor. Now, it's not that impressive by itself, but once again, Urel jumps on him, he pops that, he's at 60 armor. He's taking 40% damage. His health just increased by 60%. That's for a few seconds. That's quite insane. So, with all the tools in the game, between armor giving as well as other things like Medivh, you can effectively make anyone into a main tank, or at least have a main tank's health bar, which is quite a change. So, with that, you've already eliminated the need for the number one thing I said for what makes a tank, which is a health bar, because anyone on your team can be a health bar now, right? Raynor can be just as tanky as a Murden, which is insane. So you think about it that. So then part 2 is, with these double supports, the supports right now are almost, because of the nature of stacking and certain other things, are inarguably some of the best teamfight compositions you can run. Tyrande Whitemane is incredibly difficult to kill anything into, as well as has the potential to turn and kill anything they want, because Tyrande's Mark, you just partner with that the hyper carry. Like, the composition's very, very difficult to team fight into. Now, where this comp fails, say your comp is Tyrande, Whitemane, Raynor, well, the very obvious place this fails is we have no wave clear. We used both our ranged and our flex slots to fill in for something else. So we have no wave clear. So what do? Well, let's think about it. If our tank doesn't need to be a health bar, what if we took someone who could fulfill the other obligations of the tank, namely engage and vision, and arguably not even vision, because Tyrande gives vision, so someone who can engage, and also someone who can wave clear, and to fill in that weakness our composition just exposed. So, who has both engage and wave clear, and arguably, if you support him or give him armor to increase his health, is tankier than any tank in the game.
Good point.
So that's a lot of the thinking that's been kind of going down about why, that's also why I think Kaldor made a very specific point to emphasize. It's not Zul main tank that's being played, it's Zul double support main tank that's being played. Arguably, I wouldn't even say Zul is a main tank in this composition. I'd honestly change the line of thinking to the ranged carry becomes the main tank. And that's weird as heck to say, but it's true. If you think in these competitive compositions, even when I'm playing something like a Diablo or Muradin, when my team runs double support hyper carry, my job, and I advise a lot of people to do this, isn't to engage for my team. It's not to be at the front of my team. It's not to be eating damage. It's to stand to the side, let my supports pocket my carry, and my carry is just trading with the enemy team and eating all the damage in my place. And my place then becomes, when the enemy team steps over a certain point to engage on my carry or my supports, I am counter-engage. So if that's all the tank is doing, there's just better heroes for that than some of the tanks that exist right now. Now, obviously, it's hard to really argue against the immediate impact of, say, Diablo Charge, Lightning Breath for Peel. Like, that's some of the best counter engage in the game. But then when you look at other heroes, Murden counter engage. What exactly are you looking at there? Like, I don't know.
He basically jumps on the back line and is like, "Hi, I'm here. I'm trying to stun you." And then okay, it's over.
I mean, once you're late game and you have like 30 perfect storm stacks, maybe you can threaten someone and make them reconsider. But otherwise, you're just stunning them and saying, "Hi, I'm gonna do a little bit of damage to you at a time. You better be scared. I'm a big scary dwarf over here." But so what I'm kind of getting at with the Zool, and you also saw it a bit with others, I think in the playoffs yesterday. So I can say this one, Justin also showed off Maev as another hero that does this, because Maev wave clears and engages. She's also much better counter engaged than any of the heroes we previously mentioned. A Maev jumping onto your backline and landing a big cage when you try to engage onto his carry, that's a lot. Justin's also tried Zeratul in this role. Zeratul wave clears and VP is arguably some of the best counter engage in the game. So I'm not going to go into details about things that haven't been shown, because I can promise you people have been throwing everything at the wall at this point. But it's kind of come into this question of why play a warrior in this role? And obviously there are still some good cases for it. Like, NA seems to be the only region that's really going full all in on this. But I mean, you know, Diablo's banned. What do you play? Are the other tanks really good enough at this job to make up for it? Besides, say Johanna's taken off the table too. If your team needs wave clear, what do you pick? There's no other tanks that provide wave clear like Johanna. So that's kind of where people are at right now, at least in NA. Obviously, we'll see how far this logic holds up when put against the rest of the world, because I mean, other regions haven't really taken the same adjustment as NA. We've seen the Zool main tank in EU, and I think even in Korea a bit.
Yeah.
But I think the other things are taking a little bit of time to catch on. I have no idea how much people are going to, like how far people are going to take this, if people are going to take this further, especially because I know Blizzard has kept an eye on this. Like Tyrande, Whitemane, Deckard all got nerfed this most recent patch. Which was something that the pros were requesting, frankly. So we'll see how far this goes, but this is the basics of why Zool main tank is a thing. Now, whether it will continue to be a thing, whether it will be the best thing, is yet to be seen. But it is a thing, for lack of a better term, and you know, as anything of this nature, when you haven't played against it, it's hard to really come up with a counter strategy. So once people, I have no doubt in my mind that people are already coming, like people already have solutions to this type of thing. People have been trying this type of stuff, and that's the type of stuff I can't go into, because it once as I said, once the Pandora's box gets opened, everyone now has their time to try to come up with solutions to it, and they have either they go deeper and they try weirder stuff than Zool, or they stick closer to standard and they just try to adapt 1 to 2 picks and say, this is how we're approaching it. So right now, at least in NA, the tank meta is a mess, for lack of a better term. I sometimes envy the other regions at least right now, in that they still get to play Diablo every game, and makes me sad.
Do you think we're gonna see a Zool in BlizzCon?
I think Blizz has at least one more hotfix coming up, at least one more patch. Right now, I think over Zool, I say Kerrigan, because Kerrigan's a freaking beast on this patch right now.
If Kerrigan doesn't get sufficiently nerfed,
if Kerrigan does not get nerfed, she's a main tank 100%. I mean, she's wave clear and she's engaged. But I think I just explained why those things are looked at. So if Kerrigan, I mean, I think people are going to consider it. I can't speak as to what we're going to be playing, because
of course,
I mean, I can't go into too much. Obviously, we've done the thinking about this, and we've done as much thinking about countering it as playing it, so we've done all sorts of stuff. But yeah, no, I think the way BlizzCon is currently going out, like especially in the case of weaker teams playing up top or like better teams, like Justin, for all his for all his weirdness, at least was right about one thing, which is we're not going to be able to beat the Koreans by playing what they play. So why try to play what they play? Like,
Good
it's
point.
straight up like,
That's a-
like
That's a really good point. I mean, and
like-
it goes back to our meta episode. Like,
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
need to be able to execute things that they can personally execute.
mean,
and to be picking things that they can personally execute.
I mean, mid-season brawl, we were the only team besides I think Dignitas and Genji to take a game off Tempest, and what we brought to them was a composition they literally had no idea how to play against. We brought Diablo Phoenix Thrall, full AoE team fight, and they picked Uther because hide Uther OP, but you know you can't pick Uther into full AoE. We press R on you, like that doesn't work, and we managed to win, despite the fact that Tempest was arguably a much better team than us at that time. So, I mean, it's kind of a case of like, maybe like, you'll probably see this pop out, and I mean, if even Mopsio and the Leftovers, we'll see if they end up going, but if even they're considering this type of stuff, like, maybe it's not even going to be the underdogs, maybe it's just going to be everyone trying this stuff out. Who knows, maybe Dig has been hiding some sort of a strange JPL tank choice this whole time, and they just don't want to show it. I don't know. Like, we'll see.
I mean, JPL started out as a ranged carry, and he has always maintained that he doesn't like the team-focused style of play, which you kind of need to have with a Zool tank. But on the other hand, Zool does a lot more damage, so maybe that's something that would appeal to him. But
what would appeal to JPL is, you know, a Li Ming main tank. That would be his dream.
would be his dream situation. Which, you know, you give her enough supports, maybe that'll work. I don't know. I want to emphasize something that you brought up when you're talking about Zool, which is that double support is essentially the best team fight composition, and you still need wave clear. So generally, you know, the way tanking works in the early game is you're actually trying to slow down the enemy team's rotation and trying to speed up your team's rotation. And, you know, Zool doesn't do a lot to interfere with the enemy team rotation because he's a little bit vulnerable himself. But the fact that he can instantly clear the wave and then just leave, and then his trait pushes up with the skeletons, gives you like a small vision advantage in every single lane that Zool is clearing. And so then you have this great rotational advantage constantly due to the speed of the wave clear and the vision advantage. And then you have the late game team fight because you have the double support. So again, just tanking is really about having specific tools, sometimes even in specific matchups. And it can be tricky. And you know, you're talking about an HL environment, picking the best tank.
Yeah, HL environment, pick Diablo every game.
Yeah,
Just straight up, like, pick Diablo. If you need wave clear, pick Johanna or Blaze main tank. Enemy overcommits to any one niche type of damage, pick like a Nubarak or Arthas or something like that. But like, the Zool main tanks and this type of stuff aren't going to work in HL unless everyone transitions to a double support style of play. And if they do, obviously, yeah, pick something with wave clear. Don't try to pick Diablo in that situation. But it's probably not going to apply. So this is more of a high level competitive thinking type thing, and I don't mean that to sound elitist, but that's like.
I mean, people
not
aren't
gonna.
comps. The game is different.
Yeah, you're not going to get value out of Zool main tank in HL. I've tried, trust me.
Blaze can be running competitive as a tank, but like there's specific requirements usually. But in Hero League, Blaze is a really good tank.
Oh yeah, no, I've been farming with them.
Yeah.
You throw your oil down and people don't sidestep it in time, and that guarantees your E-lands. That's your engage mechanic. It's actually really good. Yeah. I would only argue that at like very, very high levels of play, when people are on low ping, that Blaze's engage becomes inconsistent. But in like Hero League environment, Blaze is a great tank because he gives you wave clear.
It's funny you mentioned ping, because like some tanks just become irrelevant at low ping. Like funny enough, the weirdest one, Varian. Now
it's true.
Varian is considered a counter to Tracer unless Tracer has below like 20 ping, in which case Tracer becomes a counter to Varian, which is hilarious to say, but it's actually one of the reasons some teams that don't play on low ping make this mistake. I remember mid-season brawl, the wildcard team Luna Meow made this mistake. But you'll see that any team that knows how to play on low ping will not make this mistake. And the short of it is, Varian charges Tracer and Tracers on anything above like 20 ping. She can't really react to it. She gets taunted in range of the Varian's team and she dies. Varian tries to charge taunt a Tracer when she's on low ping. She triple blinks into her team, and Varian is stranded way far away from his team and just feeds. It's like the ping actually straight up does affect a lot of tank play, or at least choices. Not too many. Varian's one of the more specific ones, just because his charge becomes so reactable on low ping. But yeah, as you said, Blaze, I don't know if I'd apply that 100% to Dodge, especially with the big oil talent at 4. But obviously, the way I'd probably put it more is with the big oil talent at 4, main tank Blaze is much more punishing to low mobility heroes. So Rainers, supports that don't have any sort of movement speed or like things like that. That's where the Blaze oil is going to shine. It's not going to be so good when you're trying to lock down, say, a Vala or a Tracer or a Li Ming or anything that can just get off the oil instantly.
Mm-hmm.
But with the big oil, it's a little harder to just sidestep, though. Obviously, I haven't played low ping Blaze, so we'll see. Maybe I get to land and it's completely garbage. Well, and then I'll be like, oh, Cav was right.
If that turns out to be the case, be sure to let me know. But yeah, it ping does matter quite a bit for some of these matchups. We're talking about a high level. And to the point where, we go to LAN events, we see heroes that literally haven't been played all season suddenly being played.
Yeah.
Not so much in Korea, because Korea already has low ping, but like other regions have started adapting to the Korean meta sometimes because they're playing low ping heroes.
Every LAN event, look for Zero Tool, look for Tracer, look for those type of heroes. They make a sudden resurgence because low ping makes them. Vala as well. Like, there's a reason these heroes don't get played like at all, and then suddenly get played a shit ton in competitive in LAN events. So
yeah,
I mean, ping does make a difference. Makes more of a difference for DPS players than tank players. I'll tell you that much. But it still makes a difference for everyone. And you'll find it hilarious that the Koreans actually, we were scrimming against a Korean team mid-season brawl, and the internet started having some issues at the hotel we were at, and our ping jumped up to 50, and they were starting to complain. And they're like, "Oh, this ping, it's so bad." And we were all like, "Do we tell them this is what we play our HGC matches on? Do we tell them?" It started to get a lot worse from there, and both teams admitted it was unplayable once it got over like 150. But it was a really eye-opening experience that, like, once we got to 50 ping, the Koreans started complaining, like, huh.
But I mean, for anyone who's watching personally, different tanks will function differently.
100%. Sorry.
Major takeaway there. So it's important. Like, if you're going to become a tank main, you actually need to think about what your ping is and how reliable or unreliable it makes certain engage mechanics, and just thinking about reactable windows and what's the average reaction speed of the people in the leagues you're playing against. And if you're on a coordinated team, the same thing applies, but you can branch out a little bit. Okay.
All right. You guys kind of mentioned JPL for a little bit there when we talk about Zul, and maybe he'll bring something for BlizzCon. I also mentioned, I also remember seeing ishb00 that when JPL made his announcement about quitting, he said that he influenced you a lot. I was hoping you'd maybe elaborate a little bit about this, how your tanking has evolved and what was the impact, at least of JPL, because you've mentioned him, on you as a player in general and as a tank specifically.
The tanking role, I don't know if it's evolved as much as it's gone in cycles, but as far as how I've been influenced, there are 5 tanks I looked at when I was learning the tank role initially. Breeze and JPL from Europe, Sign and Noblesse from Korea, and then eventually, when he started his rise, Tist from Korea. It is a firm belief of mine that EU and Korea have always had better tanks than NA. And that's not to look down on any of the NA players, but frankly, until Justing made his breakout season with Roll20, none of NA's tanks were ever able to hold up at an international stage. So for me, while the EU tanks and the KR tanks played very differently, in a lot of respects, they were still setting the standard for what is a tank. And they played different parts of that kit I described very well. Like Korean tanks, especially like Noblesse. Noblesse was famous for picking Murden and standing in the weirdest bushes where no one would expect him and taking these strange flanks. And the guy was playing like he was playing modern day like Genji on Murden. And it was such a weird style to me at first because like, oh, I'm the tank. I'm supposed to be taking damage. I'm supposed to be making space. And I realized, wait, he's making more space than I was when I'm standing at the front of my team. He's making more space by standing in these bushes and making the enemy respect him and providing vision than I ever will. And you saw this as well with some other, like, he did that on Murden. Signs ETC is obviously pretty legendary. I mean, he did some of the same thing, and for him, particularly one of the things I remember first noticing was there was a time he was playing, this was back when he was on MVP Black with the rest of the current members of the team, and they were playing a Sonya ETC composition, and he actually, instead of being the front and center man for his team, he allowed Rich on Sonya to basically turn into the main tank, while he went about this roundabout flank, looked for this backline target with bushes to the side, and got this crazy flank into pick, while the entire enemy team was just looking at Rich saying, hit me, hit me, hit me. And it was another one of those like mind-boggling, like, wait, so he's letting his team get hit so that he could find the opening rather than the other way around. Like, what's going on here? So the Korean tanks really changed my mind in that, whereas the EU tanks, the EU tanks were they were less about that whole vision thing and more just about like how effectively they used a lot of their CC tools and engages. Breeze in particular was one where he always seemed to use his tools very well. He was always landing stuff. And everything he used would turn into a kill or would turn into something. It just seemed like he just seemed like he was always in your face, and you couldn't do anything to him. But if he ever did anything to you, it would result in a kill. JPL was a bit different. I learned some of the more niche heroes from him, specifically Stitches, because Stitches was my Achilles heel as a tank for the longest time. I could not learn that hero. So eventually just decided to straight just copy JPL.
His tanking style is not intuitive. Like Stitches as a hero is very...
Stitches is He's one of the least intuitive tanks in the game. So I eventually just had to like copy JPL until I understood like why he was doing all the stuff he did. But JPL was more about like some of the more unique stuff, playing with Medivh, playing Stitches, as well as a couple just higher level things when he'd post his stuff. I actually did enjoy when he was posting his guides, even if they were in French. And frankly, the fact that they were in French sometimes let a little bit more of his personality out. And JPL's a funny guy, so. As for evolution of tank, as I said, it's kind of more cycles. Tanks do what their team needs them to do, and sometimes a tank is overpowered and you are the hard carry, and your team is just built around you, and sometimes you're super support vision and all you play is Murden and ETC and Anubrak, and you just sit in bushes all game while your team's hyper carry hits the enemy team's hyper carry. Sometimes, like the current meta, you need to be more wave clear focused. The tank role literally is just, what does my team need me to do? Because it's very rare that the tank role by itself is actually strong enough to dictate the meta rather than the other way around. Usually the other four heroes are going to dictate what you need from your tank, especially if the tank role is at all balanced. So, I mean, when it comes to evolution, it's literally just been finding ways to apply the current things. But as I said, it's kind of turned into more of thinking about things in parts. Do you need your tank to just be a health bar that doesn't die? That's all the logic that goes into tank. That's why Johanna and Murden were meta. Like, it wasn't because Murden was overpowered. It's just you needed a tank that didn't die, and the best one was Murden. Like that's what's been determining the tank meta for the past year or so. Literally, like the tanks haven't been changed or buffed all that much other than the recent health changes, and yet ETC was overpowered as heck. Without a single nerf, he suddenly went out of meta and was considered underpowered. Then different tanks rose. We saw Murden without a single buff go to like top priority, and now he's seemingly falling right back out of the meta without a single nerf. Like the tank, like it's weird to think about, but over the past years, tanks have really been touched very little, other than Diablo probably, and yet they've still managed to go from being overpowered, like top tier, to underpowered within matters of months, just based on the meta surrounding them. Like ETC became unplayable because the meta was kill the tank. What tank dies? ETC. What tank doesn't die? Murden. Murden OP. ETC terrible. What's this meta? This meta is slow damage and requires a lot of peeling or mass disruption, and there are not very many hard CCs in the meta. Wow, ETC is broken, but why would we ever play Murden? That hero doesn't do enough. Like,
this is why drafting in Hero League can be really complicated, by the way.
Yeah.
Because the pros level, people understand what the meta is and what everyone's understanding is. But in Hero League, you're going to get level issues, which can make it a little bit more difficult to pick your tank reliably.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So short one. Pick Diablo every game. All right, got it.
I mean,
that's universal tank advice, by the way. I've literally heard pick Diablo every game from every professional tank main in every region. Like, you want to win, just pick Diablo.
Yeah, 100%.
You're done.
I mean, as I said, unless a hero's overpowered, it's just what you need, and Diablo's overpowered, so.
It's kind of, first of all, I completely agree. Diablo is by far my most played tank. I guess there is a reason for that. But kind of jumping to the next thing I'd like to talk about is the difference between tanking in Hero League and, versus tanking in an organized environment. Maybe you two can expand more about the differences, because a lot of our viewers are going to be people that spend a lot of time in Hero League, and they come out of the Hero League. We have a channel. Well, it's not called Salt Mine anymore. But people were complaining about this, and one of the most complained roles is a tank. I have a backline tank. My tank isn't doing anything. Maybe you can just expand about the differences between tanking in Hero League and tanking in organized environment.
For me, the biggest difference between tanking in Hero League or any place that doesn't have comms and tanking with comms is, and if you brought it up there, in Korea specifically, there was an invade known as the Noblesse invade. That's what it was called. And what Noblesse would do is he would go stand next to a camp that he knew would be taken at a specific time. 5 to 8 seconds before the camp was going to be finished, he would call for everyone on his team to go into fog so that they didn't know where they were. They were still there. They were just soaking lanes. But some of the time, like 25% of the time, he'd be like, come to the camp. And then he would walk onto the camp once the enemy team or enemy player, and it was usually just one person, finished it. And because there was no one in vision, they just had to give you the camp. And he just took the camp, and then he walked out. And that was the Noblesse invade. He became so famous for doing this that people stopped respecting it, and then he had this perfect judgment about when he needed to call his team to actually come and when he just needed to call his team to go into fog. In a coordinated environment, you can play so many vision games with tank calls like that the game becomes information warfare. You're not actually engaging the enemy team like half the time. You're just playing information warfare constantly. You can't do that in Hero League. The only place you can practice that is in an organized environment, and to me, that's the primary difference.
For me, 4 differences I noticed purely playing it. 1, tanks die in competitive, they don't die in HL. Short thing, like when I first played competitive, I felt like my heroes were made of paper. And that's just because people know how to focus things, chain CC. You have to be much more respectful of what kills you on the enemy team. You can't just be disrespectful like you are in HL. So that's going to be one of the first things you notice. 2, other things die a lot more quickly that you CC. If you know how to properly play with your team, you will kill much more things than what you really think you can kill. There was a point with my team where my team literally had to just be like, all right, Ish, if you stun that guy, we will kill him, trust. And I'm like, it's a full health enemy tank. Like, why do you think I'm gonna? And then I stun him and he dies. I'm like, oh, okay, I see you. 3, as Cav just said, vision. Not just in information warfare. It's not just what you can do, but how important it is. In HL, you can show the enemy team on the mini map. You can ping your team. You can. I've literally. There was one time when my team was doing some sort of Sylvanas cheese down a lane, was taking the enemy towers, and I was Johanna sitting in the bush to the side, anchoring for my team, and I literally got pinged and flamed for not hitting the wall with them and slowing them down. About 3 seconds before the entire enemy team walks into me, I slow them all down and my entire team survives the engage. It's like, I just saved all of y'all by making the correct play, and I'm getting flamed for it. What? Okay, so like no one. It's not even just the information game and what you can do; it's how valuable it even is. And then the final is in HL. DPS players don't know how to soak waves, so I spend like half my games just soaking waves on like Murden or Johanna or something, and just being like, I guess I won't do my job today. Because in competitive, you usually have people that know when their job is to clear waves and when their job is to soak waves, so you can spend a lot of time as a tank sitting in bushes and looking for stuff. In HL, people want to just run it down mid and throw skill shots at each other. They just want to stack their infinite quests. I don't know what to say, so I find like 90% of my games in HL is like 5 people run mid, 5 people run mid. The solo laner goes up to their lane, the tank and support run to the bottom lane, and the DPS players stay mid throwing skill shots at each other because they need to stack their quests.
Makes sense. I mean, if you're looking at Hot Slug, right? Normally the highest winning talents are the wave clear ones, so it kind of makes sense. That where people don't focus, the talents that are actually valuable do get the value they need. So makes sense.
I've made posts like on Twitter and other stuff like, DPS players, please clear the wave and stop making your tanks and supports soak waves by themselves. That's not their fault. That's literally you not doing your job.
Yeah.
Please do your job. Thank you. This has been a PSA.
Yeah, and it makes it impossible to tank in Hero League in the same way you would tank in an organized environment, which is why pros constantly complain they can't get real practice in Hero League because the way they move around the map is completely different.
I mean, you can't do any of the maneuvers, the creative plays, the vision getting. All you can do is practice mechanics, which is why I unironically say just pick Diablo, soak waves all early game, get souls, and then just try to one-shot stuff and work on your combos. That's all you can do.
A sound advice.
The next thing we're supposed to be going over is what should players who aspire to be tank mains focus on, and the answer is apparently Diablo.
Yeah.
I'm a Diablo fanatic. I'm a Diablo addict. I'm sorry. I need help.
But Diablo will literally Diablo's hard mode. I think for controlling vision, because he can be very aggressive, especially until 7.
Oh, Diablo.
But he'll teach you everything about tanking. If you're actually winning games with him, you were probably tanking correctly. But
yeah. No, I unfortunately don't agree with that. I think proper tanking is probably better to learn with ETC or Murden.
Just because heroes that can be punished when they make mistakes.
Yeah, heroes that can be punished when they make mistakes, as well as heroes that don't teach you to just try and solo kill people by yourself.
That's actually a good point.
Heroes that actually teach you to work around your teammates. Because at the end of the day, like even when I'm playing Diablo and stuff and saying I'm frustrated with my team doesn't have any good stuff. When I get those good GM games and actually have good DPS players on my team, I will pick the Anubaraks, the ETCs, the Murdens, and those are the type of stuff I play in competitive as well. And the practice I can get there is working around my team, making sure I'm only using my skills when my team can follow up rather than just throwing them out for free. When I have people that can actually wave clear, I can actually start looking for those other plays. I wouldn't like Diablo is fun. He's great for carrying. He's great for even mechanical practice technically, even though you don't have to land a single skill shot. He's bad at teaching you what a tank should do, because he'll teach you that what a tank should do is try to 1v5 the enemy team. And that's not correct. That only works on one tank, and his name is Diablo.
And you brought up something that's really important that we didn't go over, because we talked about in order to be a tank, you need some sort of engage mechanic, but we didn't talk about engaging. Essentially means that you're holding someone still for long enough that your damage can deal damage to them. And there's actually a game that I always use an example for this. It's one of your games. Cool. You were against Calf on Sky Temple, and you were running a Johanna Greymane, and Arthalon was on Greymane, and he was like around the corner, and you knew Calf was in the bush next to boss, and you were like, and then you backed up, and then you stepped back up after Arthlon came in Curse Bullet range.
Yeah.
And then you blinded the bush for vision, and then you Blessed Shielded Calf, and he got instantly deleted.
Yes.
By the full combo. But you had to wait for all of your DPS to be in range.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about engaging. When we're talking about engaging as a tank, you need to make sure your damage are in range.
Mm-hmm.
And every DPS is a different range. You need to make sure your target is in your range, and every tank has a different engage range.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to make sure that their cooldowns are actually up. It's easier on comms, but like something you need to be watching when you're playing Heroes. You need to be watching your DPS. Like Li Ming, her orb's not up. Don't stun someone. You're not gonna kill anyone.
Oh man, the number of ETC moshes that I've seen that he just gets a 4-man mosh, but there's nobody around to follow.
So like that's what we're talking about. We're talking about engaging as a tank, and I really want to make it very clear. You're engaging so that other people on your team can do damage, and you have to be sympathetic to their cooldowns and their positioning, or you're not actually going to successfully get a kill off of your engage. That's not how you do it.
Yeah.
It's much more relevant on skill shot heroes, obviously, than like a Rainer or a Vala, but the logic still stands. You are effectively... How do I put this? Enemies have a certain point where they get low enough that they know they can die, and they have to back out. It is your job as a tank to make sure the enemy stays in range of your carry beyond that point. So there will be some times where like I won't like slide immediately. I'll be like, all right, they're still full health. We can't kill off this. But then they say trade with my carry for a little bit. I'm like, all right, they're about to hit the point where if they don't leave right now, they're dead. Now's the time to go in. Now, obviously, when your entire team is Jaina, Greymane type stuff, that moment is literally the second they see you, which is what's fun about that composition. I will never have as many positive memories as running that composition, blinding a bush, seeing Fury, not even knowing he was going to be in that bush, and having him avatar from a full screen away. That was... There's just no better feeling as a tank. But, yeah, it's about knowing, obviously, what your team can do, so, and making sure you hold them there.
Alright, awesome. So I think it's time we jump into the second segment, and this is going to be the questions from viewers. Now, we're a bit short on time. We did start a bit late, so we'll try to rush through it. Cav, if you don't mind, you're going to help me filter some of those questions that we've already answered to.
Like we've answered this first one, for instance.
Yes.
What exactly allows Zul to be a thing?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's good.
Which tanks do you predominantly choose for the kind of comp you run? What kind of, like, if you're running a dive comp, if you're running a poke comp, and what are some just strong all-around tanks?
So, the short of, if you ever look at a competitive draft, if you see a tank picked in the first rotation before bans, it is because they are an all-rounder. This is Murden, Johanna to an extent, Diablo, etc., and Anubarak are the only ones I justify as all-rounders. After that, tanks are very responsive in what you'd pick, but best for dive are obviously like Tyrael, Anubarak, Diablo, and a bit of Murden. Stage dive etc works as well. Tanks for poke, there's no tanks that poke. I think you mean tanks that either peel or tanks that are like have safe engage.
I think they mean tanks that are good against poke. Like
sponge tanks, if you will.
Sponge tank? I mean, there's no tanks that sponge damage right now, unfortunately. I guess if there's poke, like Anubarak is good against like Li Ming poke. I mean, most poke is ability damage, so like I guess Anubarak's still probably the best. Stitches is good against it because if they just want to sit back and throw skill shots, you can do that too. And hey, your skill shot kills them while theirs does tickles you. That's always fun. I mean, the best answer for poke though is always the answer that I just said for the first one, which is tanks for diving with.
Okay.
If you're trying to talk about tanks that peel dive well, that's going to be ETC, Johanna, Arthas are probably some of the best. Arguably Blaze because Bunker is insane for that, but every other part of this kit is actually really bad against dive. And I already answered the strong all-rounders part.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think that's most of it.
Okay. So next question is from Dark Wanderer. The previous one was from Buster, by the way. Should your team be positioning according to the tank or the tank positioning according to the team?
Ebb and flow, both. If your tank is trying to set up a play on the enemy team, your team should position on the tank. If your team is trying to make a play and your tank is protecting that play, the tank should position around the other DPS. So it is a little hard to say, but like, say we just talked about the Noblesse invade. Say the tank is looking in a bush and he's saying, "This guy's about to walk and face check me." the DPS obviously, like the backline needs to position up so that when the tank stuns that person dies. That's not on the tank's position. The tank is right where he's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, your team is pushing a wall. Your team is hitting a wall. The tank needs to position accordingly to keep y'all safe. There's no play to be made for the tank there. The tank's play is keep the team safe. So it's ebb and flow. Just depends on what your current goal is.
I think conceptually the best way to put that is everyone should always position according to the short-term tactical objective.
Yes.
Like, what is your team specifically trying to achieve at this moment? Everyone should position around that.
Mm-hmm.
In a Hero League environment, that can be really difficult because everyone's trying to do different things a lot of the time. And I've won Hero League games just by like, I'm just going to respect my tank's decision. Even if my tank is bad, I just follow my tank around all the time, position according to what they're doing, and I win the game because, but like in a competitive environment.
Mm-hmm.
Doing the wrong thing together is always better than doing the right thing separately.
Yeah.
So.
Next question from Katsura asking, normally the tank initiates the fight. How does the tank approach a fight though when it's initiated by another member of his team? So we did talk about those kind of duos when you have a tank without a way to initiate. So how does a tank approach that?
So there's two ways you can approach these type of situations. A classic one that's been happened a little while ago is Stukov root. When Stukov hits 13, Stukov effectively can engage Pick with his root. I forgot the talent's name.
Virulent Reaction.
Virulent Reaction, thank you. So that's a case where, weirdly enough, your support can engage fights. So in these cases, you have two options. Either you wait until the root is down. If you are the designated follow-up CC, say your team doesn't have like a Maiev or something to keep the person in the silence, you are the follow-up CC. Your job is to keep that person in the Stukov puddle and keep them there as long as possible. So you then have to hold your CC, make sure you don't overlap with the initial engage, and then go. The other option is the counter engage, which is a weird ass term, but here's the thing. Your Stukov just rooted someone. Your Stukov is now standing in place, channeling an ability for 3 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
The enemy team, if they're smart, is going to engage onto your Stukov or try to shut him down to get their person out. That's the best way to save a person that is rooted by Stukov, by the way, is to stun Stukov. Good note for you as tank players. You can now be the counter engage. If you aren't needed to kill that particular person who just got rooted, you don't add much damage as a tank. You just add CC. You keep them there. And if the person's going to stay there already long enough to die, your job is not to do anything to that person. Your job is to look for whoever's going to go on your Stukov and then go on them to protect your Stukov. So it's another play it kind of by ear, but basically the short of this is, are you necessary for that kill that the person engaged on? If the answer is yes, wait and chain your CC appropriately. If not, you are counter engage. Don't overkill the person at the cost of not being able to protect your team.
Good answer. I like it. Next one. It's a nice one. Stoutfinger asking, how do you play with a Tyrael main tank compared to a common tank with CC, and maybe some sanctification tips? I know you did say that Tyrael is not necessarily a main tank, but maybe in the cases where he is being played.
He can function because of his heroics, was my answer. And I've also been frustrated a bit, so I've actually been taking Bound by Law at 4 because picks are how you win HL, and if I want to play Tyrael in HL, by golly, I'm going to pick some people. But I'm going to start by saying Sanctification tips. I am so sorry, my friend. Sanctification is the hardest ultimate to use in HL I have ever seen. I will use it maybe... I will try to use it as much as I can, but I will maybe get one good Sanctification per HL game, and that's with a lot of practice. That ultimate is very hard to use in competitive because people don't know it's coming, because people don't want to stand in it. The way you use it in competitive is often you'll announce like 3 seconds before you do it, like, I'm psyching on this, and then your entire team positions accordingly. The second the sank comes out, your team all jumps into it, and then you just blow up someone. That's how it works in competitive. It doesn't work like that in HL because no one plays around Sanctification. So hard to use in competitive, or in HL, sorry. Hard to use in competitive too. It's a hard to use ultimate in general. But hard to use in HL, the short of it is going to be when your teammates, the best way I found to use it is when your team wants to engage on the enemy team, just sword onto where your teams are clashing. Say your Genji wants to E in, or your Maiev wants to go in, or someone wants to go in. sword onto where they want to go, and just pre-sank and just hope that they're going to be like most HL players are going to go through with that whether you sank or not. Sometimes they'll back off and you'll feel like an idiot, but that's about the best attempt you could do, and maybe next time they'll know that you're going to sank them. But it's really good to just make sure that that engage lands. I've had a couple games where like back when Malfurion Twilight Dream was super meta, whenever like I'd have like an Illidan or something that wanted to go on the enemy Malfurion, and I just know every time they go in, the Malf is going to hit R. So I'm just going to, when I see my person going in, sword onto that, hit R immediately, sank them, and 9 times out of 10, I'll sank the Twilight Dream and will kill the Malfurion. So that's the best advice I can kind of give. As for how you play Tyrio main tank, he's more of a support than a main tank in style, or even more of a bruiser support. I don't know. It's complicated. The short of it is basically you're going to be playing a lot of vision, you're going to be playing a lot of the side, and you're going to be playing a lot to enable other people rather than try to CC and pick people. So just play around that. You also have more wave clear than most tanks, so make sure you use that correctly, because that will win a lot of HL games. Alright.
Alright, fantastic.
I have 2 pieces of HL advice for Tyrael. One is go judgment. 2, if you're going to go sanctification, just try to trick your team into fighting in chokes so that they have to stand in the sank. They don't have a choice.
That sounds about right.
Fighting over camps is a really good way to make this happen. Normally, you don't necessarily want to like go for these aggressive invades and fight over a camp. But post 10 Tyrael, fighting over camps is fine in HL because your team, people will die for it. The enemy team will be like, no, this is our camp, and they'll stay there and they'll die for it once you send.
I fully agree, actually.
All right. Next question comes from Dentro, asking, what information do you think a tank should give their teams in fight and outside of them?
So outside of fights, all of it's vision. It's vision and it's what you're looking for if you see a good pick. You should always be telling your team ahead of time if you see a pick. Like, say you think someone's overextended, don't just like run at them, jump and stun and be like, where's my follow-up? Like, if I'm assuming the fact that you're saying giving your team information means you're talking about with comms or some sort of like anything with comms. Maybe I'm wrong. If there's no comms, all you can give to your team is find the enemy team, ping them, and then when you're about to go in, ping, I'm going in like 3 times, and then do it. But the information you should give your team is basically vision. Where's the enemy? What is the enemy trying to do? Is the enemy currently ganking me? Is the enemy doing this camp? If you're like Muradin, the enemy team can't punish you for it. As I said in HL, no one knows how to chain CC, so you're pretty much invincible. In fights, if you're talking about comms, your team needs to know your cooldown. Your team needs to know whether you can stay in, and your team, like outside of that, though, more focus is going to be put on the other characters. So like, unless you are trying to CC someone for a kill, unless you're trying to peel for someone and you're trying to say like, you're good, keep going, or unless you're saying like, I need help, you're frankly not saying as much in the team fights outside of the initial initiation. You your conversation is mostly setting up the fight. After you've set up the fight, though, you should, until your CC rotations back up, you really don't have much to say. Most of the focus should be then on supports and DPS players saying stuff.
All right. Cav, the following questions are coming from your Discord, so I think we should do the honors.
This is from Gronman. When trying to hold the line as a tank, how does it differ from a tank like a Trahana or Arthas to a tank like Diablo or Tyrael? I think when he's talking about, I think he's talking about walling, like when you're standing in front of your team.
Yeah.
How do you, like Johanna and Arthas, I think it's relatively easy to wall as those because you're just trying to maximize your sustain. But how do you do it when you're a Diablo or a Tyrael? My answer would be you don't.
I agreed fully.
those tanks should just be flanking. Pick the right tank for the job. Don't try to do the job with the tank that does not suit that role.
He said everything I would have said. Perfect.
Awesome.
Also from Grauman, how do you communicate forward and backward movement to your team while contesting an area without actually engaging? Ooh. I want to hear your answer. This is a really interesting question.
It is.
So the short of this is know what the point of no return is. So a Nubarak, you can't E in and still have an escape. So a Nubarak, the reason he's kind of more all-rounder and not a strict dive tank is because in competitive, your E is literally the last ability you use unless you know you have an outnumber on the enemy team. So a Nubarak, you walk back and forth, you Q, you shield, you can go back and forth. If you hit a Q, you can follow up with an E if you think you're going to kill. But the last thing you want to do is EN for harass or for poke or for wave clear or for anything, because the second your E is down, you're a kill target. And once you're a kill target, you can't step up again. The whole thing is gone. So coordinating back and forth movement with a team without engaging is very heavily dependent on always making sure your team has the ability to disengage anything the enemy team does. So this means your supports need to have cleanses and stuff up. That means you need to be positioned in such a way that if you get engaged on, you can still get out. Sometimes this means holding your stuff. Like, one of the reasons I love going Laws of Hope on Joe is I don't have to use Iron Skin when I take damage. And that means I can save Iron Skin just for the CC cleanse. So it's a bit, I guess... I guess the question's not necessarily... I guess maybe I didn't answer the question too well, because it says how do you communicate forward and backward movement? And frankly,
I think it's important to understand the limits of each tank in a given scenario.
Yeah.
And then you're like, you literally at a professional level, it should be like, I'm on Johanna, and your communication's done.
Yeah.
Because people should understand what the point of no return is for different heroes that their allies are playing, and like how they play those heroes. Yeah. But like, ping, if you're like in a hero league environment, you can ping back. Like, I think pinging retreat when you start backing up is very reasonable. And your backline knows, I'm backing up, and you could, ping forward or ping on a flank, like I'm going here. But it's very cooldown based. And it's just hard without comms, really, is what it comes down to.
Like as I said, if your Nubarak doesn't have an E, he can't posture up without being stuck there. If your Tyrael doesn't have a sword, if your Murden doesn't have a jump, if any of these abilities have been used, there's no longer the possibility of disengaging once you get engaged on. And this applies to DPS too. Your Vala just vaulted. Your Vala needs to play as if she has no vault for 10 seconds, because if she tries to posture up as if she has vault and then gets engaged on, well, maybe if she had vault, she probably could have dodged it. But she can't anymore. There's now a fight, and there's no avoiding that fight. The fight just happened. So if you want to talk about without engaging, posturing up and forward, it literally is just based on cooldowns. And it's based on threat. Like, you need to know when your point of no return is, as well as the enemy team's point of no return. Because you'll find a lot of people, especially in HL, people don't respect their point of no return. Someone will use a mobility tool, they'll use a blink or something, and then continue playing up as if they had it, when you shouldn't respect that. They do that, you go on them. They have no way of disengaging you anymore. So, it's a bit complicated, but it's cooldown based is probably the best way to put it.
That's a good answer. If your offlaner is playing another tank, like ETC, how do you communicate who performs what task if your team is together? Is it generally decided before the game starts? And how would you communicate a need to switch this around mid-game?
Okay, we do not draft anything like this without knowing exactly what we want to do beforehand. So, we talk about this before game, and there's no conversation about this mid-game other than a confirmation. This is just the nature of competitive play, and we draft our comps with a purpose. So in the case of like ETC, let's say ETC is not the offlaner. Let's say we have like ETC Blaze. Blaze plays offlane until 10. Once you do 10, you swap the ETC to offlane because the global is more valuable than Blaze's wave clear, and Blaze frankly protects your backline more with bunker. That way, if the enemy engages on your team, you have bunker to last until ETC stage dives in, or if you want to engage, the ETC stage dive is the engage and the Blaze is the follow-up. That's literally just how we build our compositions. It's intrinsic in that thing, and it's just something you kind of understand at the higher levels. I don't really know how to answer this question without sounding a little conceited and kind of saying this is just something you need to learn.
That's fine.
It's fine.
We approve of that on this show.
Yeah. It's kind of a think about why you're doing what you're doing, and if you're trying to talk about like who engages and who follows up, the general rule is who has the more guaranteed and or safe engage. Like, stage dive is going to be a lot more consistent and engaged than Blaze oil into charge. So you always initiate with stage dive in those cases, and then Blaze is the follow up or just stays back and peels with bunker. Say you have Diablo. People run some weird combinations of tank offlaners. Say you have like a Diablo Muradin for some reason, because I have seen this happen in HL. In that case, what's more guaranteed, a Diablo charge flip or a Muradin stun? If your answer was the Muradin stun, you need to rethink life, because the Diablo thing is literally point and click and is always going to happen the exact same way unless the Diablo flip is interrupted. So in this case, the engage should always be Diablo flip into Murden stun, excepting in the weird case where the Diablo is not safe to charge in, and the Murden can just fish for stuns during that time. That's the only exception for that, in which case the Diablo shouldn't even be going in the first place. The Diablo's holding the stuff for counter, as I said before. So,
whoever's in position and is more reliable in terms of their engage is the person that should do it.
Yeah.
And that's going to come down to kits, really, like what individual heroes you're talking about. And we didn't mention this, but we should have talked about it when we brought up the Stukov thing. Every CC can, in theory, be initiation or follow-up. But reliable initiation CCs have lower reaction windows, have some guaranteed reason they hit, and then anything that does not fall into that category is better as follow-up. So EDC Power Slide is great follow-up and great initiation. Doesn't matter which one you're doing. But Murden Stormbolt, it's hard to initiate with. It's very skill intensive.
It's hard to initiate with unless you're willing to invest the jump, which then makes the engage less safe. If you jump and then point blank, like Stormbolt. But the best example to me is like Tyrande E. You see so many people throw out Tyrande E's like it's initiation. It's like, no, that is such an unreliable CC in small window. Like, why would I stun then Diablo charge when the Diablo charge into flip is a guaranteed like 2 seconds of CC? There's no potential to dodge this at all. Why would I ever initiate with a Tyrande stun? And it's that logic that applies into other tank CC chains as well.
What offlaners need minor changes to become strong tanks?
There's a lot of things to answer this. Okay, Blaze already got changes to make him tanks. I don't know if he's a strong tank, but he got changes to make him a good tank. So he already got what he needed. Yrel, this was also in the article thing I was going to write, but Yrel literally, the only thing she needs, in my opinion, to be well, she needs a couple things, but the main thing she needs to be a main tank is she needs her CC to set up the opponent in any way, shape, or form. Right now, Yrel has like 0 initiation power unless she is specifically coming from a flank, and even then she doesn't hold anyone still long enough for like say you pick like Yrel Li Ming. Good luck landing a Li Ming combo off of anything Yrel does. Like, that's not happening. Not to mention Yrel's engage is so easily peeled because if you can interrupt her jump and all this stuff. So like Yrel, what she needs for me personally is she needs her hammer to CC more predictably and more effectively. The suggestion I'm throwing out is her hammer knocks more in the direction that you aim it rather than radially outward, and instead of just stunning on max charge, stuns for 1 second if you knock into a wall. Now obviously wall stuns have been done, so I don't know, people may have their opinions on that, but the idea there is if you can extend the stun duration and make it not just on full charge, as well as a little bit more predictable, like, oh yeah, Yrel's going to knock into this wall. And when she does, the person will be stunned and sit there for 1 second. Now you can have follow-ups damage. Now you can actually have initiation. Now you need a couple other things partnered with this. I think if she's going to be made into a main tank, I think her E range needs to be increased, or at least have a talent to potentially increase it. So that she can more reliably get on people. But the thing is, like, Yrel is flawed as a tank because she has no ability to do, like, she cannot initiate on anyone, excepting the weird cases where she gets behind the enemy team, and most of those cases probably shouldn't happen, especially if you are the main tank, because enemies are actually going to watch you. You can't.
See, I don't think Yrel's ever going to be changed.
I don't
just
think
because
so
I think, well, Blizzard would have to completely reanimate her E if they sped it up, and the fact that her E lasts 0.625 seconds regardless of distance is unacceptable. It's too big.
She's her kit right now her base kit would literally have to be changed to make her a main tank. It's not like Blaze.
That's not a minor change.
Yeah. It's like I guess Blaze, like, they did some of the minor changes. They increased his health pool. They increased the viability of some of his tank talents, like the why can't I think of the word? The unstoppable talent at 1. Obviously, what?
New habits. What's the
New
talent?
habits. I was trying to think of the word unstoppable. That's where my brain is. Oh god. Talking too much. Anyways, there's that.
Players go by what talents do, by the way. Casters need to actually know the name. That's the major difference between the.
No, I know most of the names. I'm actually usually pretty good with the names, and I have to be because McIntyre tries to describe talents but always gets the name wrong. So talking with him is so confusing. He literally will be like talking about like Blaze's level 7 and be like, "Yeah, that new habits talent." And I'm like, "You mean Crossfire?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's the one. You knew what I was talking about. It's fine. It's fine." I'm like, God.
I think he was just being descriptive because he only recently started taking Crossfire. It's a new habit for him to take it.
Oh, Mac's proud of that one, that he made everyone take Crossfire. Other than that, I don't really know what like other. I mean, there's no others that like need minor changes. Like, I mean, I'm even looking through my list. Like, a lot of the bruisers are built to be bruisers, and that's fine.
Yeah. Like
one of the ones
Artanis would need huge changes, I
Oh, yeah.
think.
One of the
Diva
ones
would need big changes.
Diva's the one that doesn't fit like either category very well, so I would love Diva to actually be made into a main tank, but they would need to do a lot of changes towards buffing her mech and nerfing her pilot form, as well as like making her ability to do things more consistently. Like right now, one of Diva's biggest problems is she just dies. She is a kill target if she ever tries to do anything. She has no initiation outside of bomb and maybe bunny hop, but why take bunny hop when your mech dies instantly? I take bunny hop, by the way. It's fun. You just have to hope you don't lose your mech before you finish bunny hop, which, you know, Liz, some armor on bunny hop, please. Please. I will throw my little prayer to that one.
Or we could use the cooldown. Bunny Hop's cool. It's not quite good enough for her optimal playstyle, it feels like.
But I mean, it's because I said like the pilot, like when you have a Diva kit and you actively want to be in pilot form for like a large percentage of the time, I feel like that's a problem with the kit, with the one, classifying the character as a warrior, and two, the character's lore itself. But I don't know. That's on me, apparently. Alright.
Alright.
I think that's the answer. The majority outside of Blaze, the majority need more than minor changes. Is the short answer.
So this is a bit of a different take on the Zool question. A number of non-warrior tanks have popped up recently, and we've had a lot of non-tank warriors. Well, this is obviously not intended by Blizzard. Do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing for the state of the metagame?
I don't think the fact that they appeared is bad. I think the reasons why they appeared were bad, and the reasons why is armor stacking. I think armor stacking is blatantly a problem for the game. For those of you who've not played other MOBAs, most armor in games work in a very different way and give diminishing returns the higher armor you get. So
whereas in Heroes, every point of armor is actually more valuable mathematically than the point before it.
Yes, agreed. So literally, the way armor currently works in the game, it's incredibly unhealthy and heavily encourages stacking it rather than individual instances of it. To the point where if you can stack enough, as I said, and it's build your own tank kit. Anyone can have 3,000 health at level 1 with 75 armor. So I think that's unhealthy, and I think there's one other thing which I've kind of thought personally, which they're over bloating. I think that's going to be unhealthy, which is heal debuffs, and specifically how spell power reduces with heal abilities as well. But that's a conversation for another time. I think the armor stacking is incredibly unhealthy and needs to be fixed. I think it's terrible for the game. I do think if it's removed, we'll see a lot of this off-tanking stuff, like this main tanking other heroes fade. But I don't think the tanking of other heroes is unhealthy at all, and I think it's actually caused a lot of people to reconsider what exactly a tank does, which is nice to me.
That's a good answer. Also from Lord Vu, people have recently complained pretty emphatically about the state of the off lane. What change would you like to see made, speaking as a tank player, given that said changes will affect the whole map?
The short of it is give wave clear to if Blizzard wants to remove wave clear from supports, right now some of the best wave and safest wave clear in the game is on tanks. Funny enough, Urel, Blaze, Johanna, like you can't pick Thrall in the off lane and you don't bully and you don't wave clear, so he's kind of a liability until he turns on and becomes a team fight monster. Like a lot of the offlaners, the reason they complain is because they want to be able to play melee assassins and stuff in that lane. but there's no argument for why, because they don't wave clear very well. They don't win lane. So why would you ever play that? Like, especially when, like, maybe they scale well into team fights, but that's like the only thing they do, and
Right.
it's a problem.
That's an old state of the game
Yeah,
where
so
the meta was all about we're just going to AFK in this lane until we get to this power spike, and then we'll just win the team
I
fight.
mean, yeah.
Now,
So
if
like,
you're not macroing, you're never going to get to that point.
So like I'm not talking about this as a tank player. This is talking about it like hearing all these other melee players and completely respecting what they say. Like, if they are going to remove wave clear from other classes like supports, give it to characters that need it. Like, they've been making so many characters that are based on hitting heroes only, who have very limited wave clear, and that's not good. Like, I honestly think the melee assassin role needs a whole like overview to give more of these characters self-sustain and wave clear, because like you can't pick these heroes. Like, you can't pick stuff like Artanis or Alarak or Thrall in the off lane because they're missing wave clear, and you can't pick stuff like Sonya right now very easily because not only like okay, Yorel, say you win a trade and chunk her for half her health after she gets ganked, she walks back, she presses DQ, waits 8 seconds, presses DQ again, she's full health again. There was no risk reward there. She didn't have to hit the wave, she didn't have to step up, she didn't have to use mana because the trait removes the mana cost. So what did you do? Sonya, on the other hand, you chunk her, she's now too low to go into the wave to spin. You now keep her off the wave. There's actually a skill risk reward here. You can stop the Sonya from sustaining back up to full health. That's a lot more healthy for the offlane, and it puts a lot more argument into trying to win it. So the Blazes and the Yorels who can just back off, wave clear safely, and then almost mana. Well, I'm glad they finally added mana to these two heroes, but just go off and clear without hitting anything, without taking any risk. That's not healthy to the game. That's terrible. Like, there's no point in hitting these heroes. Like, Mac has literally been depressed. He's like, I'd ask you to gank this hero, but he'll step back and full heal in 2 seconds, in 8 seconds. Like, it's not like Leoric, Sonya, the heroes that actually have to actively trade and stuff to heal are so much healthier for the game in this off lane because they actually make winning the lane matter. So like my two things would be, one, rework a lot more of these melee assassins to give them better wave clear options, and two, remove things that allow people to sustain without taking risks, or would be my two biggest things for the offlane.
Good point.
That would make it so that rotating up there as a tank was more of a threat. You could potentially secure more ganks. Because currently it's almost not worth trying to gank your own.
Oh, no, 100%.
You're like, nah, I'm good. I'm just staying
unless you can 100 to 0 a target, there's no point in going to the offlane. They're always full health. Just how it is right now.
Yeah.
When are you going to do more educational articles and videos like you did for HeroesHearth? Example, to queue or not to queue?
First of all, for HeroesHearth, you should go check out.
I think you meant HeroesHearth, not HeroesHearth. That was a weird question.
I understand there, kind of. I'm currently trying to do more streaming. I am streaming twice a week right now, and I'm trying to. I'm not saying I'm doing it in exchange for the educational content, but between all the stuff that's happening recently, streaming's been easier, and I'm trying to do a lot of the education through streaming. So if you did like that, I will try to check out my streams. I do have VODs of all of them. If there is still a demand for videos and written guides, which I'm sure there is, I will start working on them again when I have time. But right now, I am focusing on, this little thing called BlizzCon. So,
just a little thing,
small thing.
How does your mindset change based on the matchup and map when you're tanking?
Very broad question. Unfortunately, I have to give a very broad answer. Every map has heavily focused on teamfight, macro, or some hybrid of the above. So, as well as what my team wants to do and what the enemy team wants to do. So ideally your team picked a composition that works well on the map. If you're on a teamfight based map like Volskaya, you're picking for teamfight stuff. If you're on a macro map like Sky Temple, your team better have a lot of wave clear and split push and independence. So my mindset changes based on the two things of how do I think is the most efficient way to win this map, and how do I think my team wants to win the game. And unfortunately sometimes they contradict. Sometimes you have a team fight comp on a macro map or the other way around, in which case you have to prioritize your team comp's goal over the map. Sometimes you can still get away with that type of stuff. Obviously, it's not optimal, but like if your team isn't a team fight comp, doesn't matter what the map's goal is, you can't team fight. So there's no point in playing like that. Mindset just changes on those two factors.
And if you're a new player, that can be a very difficult thing to assess. You just have
100%.
to ask questions and do your best with it. It's going to be a developing process. What are the factors for soaking in lane versus in a bush? And I assume that means AFK, like soaking the lane in a bush versus using your abilities to slowly but actively clear it.
Yeah, okay. So one, are you pushing the wave? If you're pushing the wave, obviously you do that from lane. Like, if the short of this, the best way to determine this is, do you know where the enemy is? If you know where the enemy is, and don't have any conflict with them, go ahead and push out the lane unless you really want to not show to make a gank. For the most part, like when you go into a brush is either when you don't want to reveal yourself so you can't get ganked, or you want to put pressure on another part of the map via like knowledge. And the second thing is a lot harder to do in HL. It's much easier to do in competitive, because in HL, you going into the bush in your side of the lane, the enemy probably wasn't looking at their minimap to begin with, so they probably don't even know you're missing and are going to play the same way whether you're there or not. Like, that's just HL. I'm sorry to put it that way, but that's how that works. So for the most part, in HL, the only time you want to be soaking from a bush is when you just don't want to show the enemy so you can't get ganked, because enemy doesn't even know you're in that lane or not. How are they supposed to gank you? They don't know where you are unless you literally showed walking into that bush and haven't showed anywhere else for like a minute. So for the most part, unless you are actively pushing and know you are safe to be actively pushing, brush soaking is always safer. And the less information you can give out is always better.
And next question, still from Huang Fam, is how often should I be anchoring versus burning down an objective?
Funny enough, this has the almost exact same answer. Do you know where the enemy is? If the answer is no, you should be anchoring. No questions asked. Like, someone needs to be anchoring if you do not know where the enemy is. If you know the enemy is there, where the enemy is, and know they are not where you are, burn. Burn to your heart's content. It no longer matters. There's nothing to anchor for.
This is a weirdly specific question. What makes Diablo have a high win rate in HGC on Volskaya?
My best answer for this is Diablo is a team fight monster, and Volskaya is a team fight map. Not to mention, he's really good when you have to stay and fight in his lightning breath. So those would be the two best answers I can give. I don't know if there's anything more specific than that, but it's basically Diablo's biggest weakness is he has very little PvE. And that really doesn't matter on Volskaya, where it's mostly just about fighting over an objective.
I think part of that question might be because there's so few walls on the first Punisher pad.
I mean,
that it can be a little bit difficult to line up the wall stun, but I don't think that's an issue in competitive because there are angles you can hit consistently on the corners.
No, you can't. It's not the greatest map for wall stuns. Like, the best wall stun maps in the game are still Infernal Shrines, Cursed Hollow, and Battlefield of Eternity. But Volskaya is not amazing for that. But when the map is literally about standing there and fighting over a point, Lightning Breath gets a lot of value, as well as Flame Stomps. Like, that map has a lot of 5v5s, and that's where Diablo's best. Not to mention, it's very rare the first objective gets capped before level 7, and Diablo's biggest power spike is at level 7.
And from KDK, why are you so dang adorable? Is the question here. And I actually have a good answer for this. I think ishb00 is just very fresh-faced looking, and it's his enthusiasm and his innocence for the game that just makes him sort of infectious. His obvious enjoyment sort of brings everyone to the yard, I think is the way to put that, right?
Swear, Katie just likes making me feel awkward and enjoying it. That's all I can imagine. She does this a lot.
I mean, that's just a girl thing in my experience. If they know they can make you feel awkward, they're going to enjoy it. Everyone needs a hobby. That's what I like to say.
Apparently.
From Wolvos, which tanks are the best to protect the X comp? So protect the hammer, protect the hyper carry, I guess basically is the takeaway here.
So the best tanks for those are the best counter engage comps. So to protect the X comp, you're not taking damage for your target. You are letting your target be the main tank effectively, and having your supports pocket them. You should play a tank, so you should play in a style that requires you to not get any healing whatsoever. You should never need healing. In that regard, the heroes that have immediate impact on a counter engage are good. This means Diablo's decent for it. Johanna's really good for it because the blind has immediate impact. Arthas is okay, but you kind of have to sit on your carry, which is a little unfortunate because you require some self-healing. ETC is really good, especially once you hit 13 and you have the CDR on your W. Those would probably be the best for me. As for who's best against, which is sorry, I'm reading ahead and seeing the next part.
Yeah, and which one's best against them?
Best against are just tanks that can consistently engage on that person, and ideally ones that either remove the support from the equation or don't care about the support. It's a weird way of putting it, but it's like, okay, does the enemy not have a cleanse? Varian's actually really good against Protect the X comps if the enemy cannot cleanse his taunt, because his engage is very reliable, and a lot of these Protect the X comps are auto attack based, which means his parry gets a lot of value. But the other better ones are like Anubarak's really good, because these comps are very dependent on their supports keeping their carry alive. So if you can get a cocoon on the support, the X dies. Or sometimes you can't get to the support if the support's positioned correctly. The other awkwardly fun thing you can do here is cocoon the target, the X itself, which then gives your team space to move up and basically surround the X. And now your team, and even if they get broken out and their team can still protect them, your team's now no longer has to deal with the issue of getting onto them in the first place. So like Anubarak's good against it. Diablo and Varian are okay because their engages are pretty guaranteed, but Diablo can sometimes struggle. Murden's okay against it. Those are the ones that come to mind. I might be thinking a couple others. Johanna's actually...
I would add Stitches. Just because if you hit a good hook, it doesn't matter how much protection they have, especially in the late game.
Stitches and Garrosh, you're right. Displacement's really good against these comps as well. Alright.
How do you plan your engages on comms? Give team time to call if they can't go, get in position, etc.
I tell my team what I'm going to do like 3 to 5 seconds in advance all the time. That's just how it works. And if someone says I can't, then I say, all right, I'm not doing it. That's the communication process. I literally say I'm looking at X, and maybe someone will say combo in 5, and I'll be like, okay, I'll wait. And if it's available, like I don't say this, but in my mind I'm like, all right, if in 5 seconds this opportunity is still there, I'm going for it. If not, then the opportunity is missed. Whatever. There'll be more opportunities. Better than trying to take an engage where I don't have cooldowns up behind me.
And it's really what it comes down to, right? It's just on comms, you need to make sure everything's up at the same time, and so you call what you're going to do as far in advance as possible. Sometimes it's split second window. You don't have much of a choice. I remember when Alex was on Dignitas back in the day, they had a 3-2-1 countdown, and what they would do is the tank would just start counting down. Just be like going on, looking at material 3, 2, and if you didn't want them to go, if you didn't have the follow up, they'd just be like no. Anyone could say no, and then he would stop counting, and you're like, okay, I'm not going then. You didn't have to say that, but I've coached teams. They all tell me that feels really unnatural when they first try it.
It does.
But it's not going to feel natural. Comms and coordinating with comms are never going to feel natural. It's about developing an efficient system. And really, you're just looking to try and do it as far in advance as possible. Whatever system you can do that gets you there.
I mean, when I first started trying to do comms for this type of stuff, I was like, how in the world am I supposed to call my engage like 3 to 5 seconds before I do it? Like, are you really telling me to look that far in advance? And the short of it is, yes, you kind of have to. And like the more you play the role, the more you'll get a sense of when something is going to happen. You'll get more of a sense of like as well as when to communicate beforehand. Like before I gank a lane, I will literally say, going in looking for this person. And if they stay overextended when I get there, I go on that person immediately. My team is looking for it. And if they don't, I say, all right, never mind. And I just hold my position. And I don't show and I don't gank. Or like some cases, I'll be like, if I'm in a bush, I'm like, all right, on me. I think these are when I don't like do a countdown. I will literally just say, on me, looking for face check, like looking for someone to face check me. And when that happens, my team should know generally what I'm going to do. I don't have to tell them I am stunning X target in 3 seconds. Like that part usually is without sometimes you have some communication things, but like, for example, Garrosh can sometimes be hard for DPS players to communicate with because they like, are you just what are you throw taunting? Are you throw queuing? Are you queue then throw taunting? Sometimes players have a little trouble telling what I'm going to do on Garrosh, but that's stuff you have to work out on outside of the game. You can't be saying that in game. Like, once you get in game, your team should know exactly what you're going to do when you get the pick and what a pick looks like for your character.
That's what replay review exists for.
What?
Yeah, that's what replay review exists for. You gotta replays together so you
not...
understand what people want to do in a coordinated environment. In Hero League,
I mean, it's not even just replay. Like, literally, in Hero League, the only players that are able to follow up on a Diablo combo consistently are Diablo players. And I say this completely sincerely. Like, I was once playing with, like, Bam Bam, and he was playing Malfurion, and I've never hit so many Diablo combos in an HL game in my life, because every time I went in, he knew exactly when, he knew that, like, non-Diablo players will not realize Diablo's overpowered. You can react to it rather than try to predict when Diablo's going to flip. You can actually wait for Diablo to start his flip animation and then do your CC, and it will still work for Tyrande, Malfurion, and a lot of other heroes. That being, Bam Bam understood this. He knew what Diablo was. So if I stunned, walked around to reposition, and then started the flip, the root would still be in the right place. This is something that's hard to do with, like, pure support mains, because they don't know that, like, I'm gonna stun, then walk around, then flip. And I've even had some issues with, like, with some of my DPS players with this, where it's like, they don't expect me to do that reposition to get a better flip, or sometimes they'll try to combo off the initial stun rather than the flip, or there'll be all sorts of weird stuff with that. So heroes like that, you just have to, like, sometimes you have to have your other players play your hero just to understand what you're trying to do, but sometimes you just have to talk it through. That's not stuff that can be called in-game, though. That's not in-game comm material.
No, setting up combos and, like, explaining how heroes work to everyone on your team is something you have to do out of game. Okay, the blue questions. 12 more. He has 12 questions in a row. We got this.
Oh my. Oh my.
This is actually an interesting one. Take each of the 6 most used tanks at the moment: Johanna, Diablo, Mura, Anub, etc, Garrosh, and which player do you think is best at each of them in the professional scene worldwide?
Oh my. I don't know the answer to this right now. Okay. Let's start. Johanna, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say I am one of the best Johannas in the world right now. At least one of the most avid pickers of Johanna most of the time. I haven't done it as much recently, but when she did get buffed, I felt like I was the one making a case for her, and I think me and JPL were the two that made Sins Exposed the meta pick at 4. So I would like at least a little bit of credit for that one. I think I do think there are other good Johanna players, and obviously Joe's not the highest mechanical skilled player, so it's not like there's huge differences in play, but I think I did pioneer a little bit of the modern Joe play, and I think I'm probably get the most value out of Blessed Shields out of any tank player, even in the world, to be honest. Except for maybe, like, the more cool, like the Dignitas and Genjis, where it's like, is this the player or is this the team? I can't tell. Like, you see, like, freaking Tist Blessed shielding someone max range, a BFG and a Genji X striking. It's like, oh god. All right then.
By the way, there have been Blessed Shields from Tist where the follow-up started casting before the Blessed Shield did.
Yes,
like
and that's I don't know if that's as much Tist Johanna. Like, Tist is a good Johanna. Tist would be the other player I'd pick up here. But other than me. But I think that's just that team operates so well together. It's inhuman. It's honestly inhuman. Diablo, I think right now the best Diablo players are frankly European. I think that's got to be like Mopsio. I haven't seen too much of Breezes. Probably Mopsio, JPL. This was another case where I told people the W build Lightning Breath was the style. I made that a thing, but I think probably Mopsio is one of the big players I look for Diablo right now. There's a reason it's banned against him so much. Muradin. Muradin, it's... The two players that stand out to me right now are in NA, Caterpillar is a very good Muradin, and in EU, Breeze is a fantastic Muradin. He played this a lot like at the internationals. He hasn't... I don't know. Maybe you have a different opinion of that. Playing against his Muradin, when that... Like, I say this... Okay, sorry, hold on. Let me justify this. I say this playing against his Muradin at Midseason Brawl before they did their current roster swaps. Playing against... He had probably the best Muradin I've played against at that time. So I haven't played against them since they've swapped their roster. I have no idea how things have changed with the dynamic. I do respect the crap out of his Murden for that specifically.
It's just weird because historically, Murden is Breeze's lowest win rate tank all time professional play.
I don't. Anubarak was one of my worst all-time win rates, and yet I considered him one of my strongest tiers and brought him out against Ballistics in a I don't know. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. All I'm gonna say is playing against Breeze's Murden, he had a very good Murden at that time. I don't know how things have changed since then. If it's not him, I don't know who else I'd really say for the Murden. Anubarak, for Anubarak play, the only player outside of Korea that like is a standout Anubarak player is JPL. Breeze sometimes has moments, but JPL has been known for his Anubarak, and then outside of that, it's all of the Korean tanks. Probably not Tist as much, but I know Hooligan I know has definitely played a decent amount of Anubarak.
Yeah, Hooligan has fallen in love with the noob. It's now his favorite warrior to play.
Yeah, like you want to see a noob play, look at Korea. They're probably the best at it. ETC. Is ETC one of the most used tanks? ETC is considered really underpowered.
I think
so
Zool may have more games than ETC for the
ETC
split of HGC.
I mean, the traditionally best ETCs in the world have always been Breeze and Sign.
I don't think that's
that being said,
changed.
Yeah, ETC hasn't been meta for a while, so I don't know how much it changed. And then Garrosh. Garrosh, frankly, has seen a lot of, not seen much play in NA recently, so I can't really justify any of the NAs. It's got to be probably similar to other Mopsio, JPL, and I think a couple of the Korean teams have definitely been playing Garrosh, though I can't remember off the top of my head who's been doing it. But that's another Mopsio, JPL one.
It's weird because, what is it, Gondar from Blossom was considered the Garrosh player in the Korean scene, and then he swapped to range when they recruited Honkono, and now I think he might actually be back on tank, but he's really rusty because he hasn't played tank for 6 months.
Yeah.
So I think that one's really difficult to evaluate at the moment.
Weirdly enough, Garrosh has always been much more popular in Korea and China than in NA or EU. So, I don't watch China's scene. I would not be surprised if there were actually really good Garrosh players in the Chinese scene.
They're not.
China, okay. The thing about China is, I don't know, their individual players aren't terrible, but their team play and understanding of the game just falls so far behind the other regions. It's what costs them so much. They try to be Korea, but they don't have Korea's mechanical skill to get away with it. It's the best way I can put it.
Unfortunate. Many professional tank players don't bother picking tank when playing Hero League. Do you think the current state of top-ranked Hero League is actually detrimental to someone wanting to learn tank at a high level?
Okay, no. I fully disagree with this, but to an extent. So, my personal philosophy on this is if you try to spam non-stop any one tank in HL, you're going to pick up more bad habits than good. Obviously, you can learn the mechanics of the hero, but that's when it gets detrimental. Like, when I spam Murden in HL, the best way to play Murden in HL is to stack as much Perfect Storm as I can and just try to solo carry the game. When I play Diablo in HL, the best way I can carry is by just trying to one-shot and carry the game by myself. It's good for mechanical practice, terrible, terrible, terrible for decision-making and habits. That being said, you do need to play the heroes to be good at them. Like, there are many tanks that if you do not have regular practice on, you will not do well with them. Stitches is a great example. I mean, even like Garrosh, Diablo, these tanks, if you do not regularly practice them, you will grow rusty on them, no matter how good you may feel you are. So HL helps with that, and it makes you better at your individual tanks. You just have to be ready to differentiate between competitive and HL and make sure you don't pick up bad habits. And for me, I personally do that by literally every day trying to play at least like all of my tanks only one game and not spamming any one specific one to the point where I might pick up bad habits. Basically, the idea is with any HL, make your process conscious. Don't let you fall into that little slump of unconscious like playing where you just start to play and develop bad habits, because that's when it becomes detrimental. But no, I don't think HL is detrimental, and I think most of the tank players are not picking tank in HL because we've been playing the same like 10 heroes for 3 years with very little changes. Like, if you've been playing for that whole time, you've been through a meta where every single tank has been first pick or first ban, and if you haven't learned the tank by then, like, what are you doing with your life? So
we're gonna skip question number 3 because we actually answered it in a great amount of detail on the shot calling episode. Assuming you have reasonable knowledge of the enemy position, if the enemy tank engages on your backline, should you generally try to get a counter pick on the enemy backline, or the counter engage, as we've been saying? Or if no such thing is possible, is it reasonable to assume your DPS players did not have the correct positioning?
All right. Counter pick is a bad way of putting this because unless you were Diablo or Murden with full stacked Perfect Storm, you're not killing people by yourself. Like, get that idea out of your head. That's a bad idea. What you can, however, do is zone the enemy backline. For example, Murden jump stuns your carry. Okay, well here's the thing. Maybe that's not even bad positioning of carry. Murden jump stun has extremely long range. What that, however, does, you probably can't prevent that unless you're like ETC and can knock him out of the air. What you can, however, do is step in between your carry and then the Li Ming that's going to try and combo this stun target and block the Li Ming spells and then counter pressure Li Ming. You're probably not killing her, but you can at least threaten her, and if you hold your CCs, maybe she'll stay a little too long, and when your carry gets unstunned, he can then turn on the Li Ming with you. So the biggest way I can say is figure out how that person dies and prevent that. If that means stopping them from getting CC'd in the first place, that's your only option. But if the engage has already happened, the best thing is to cut off the damage rather than the engage, because you're not going to be able to do it. Now, if it's something like a Sonya gets on your backline that can kill your backline by themselves, then you actually need to peel the back. Then you actually straight up need to peel the Sonya, because that's just one person, and they're not going to be able to hold them there for the rest of their team. You actually do need to carry to peel the threat. So if you have to peel the threat, and if even peeling the threat or trying to, and your person still dies, I mean, yes, sometimes you're ranged have terrible positioning and there's literally nothing you can do, but usually there's something you can do. The problem is if that something requires you killing yourself to keep them alive, then it is their problem. That's when it becomes their problem. When the something you can do to keep them alive requires you to die, that's when it's a problem, and it is their positioning.
So if you do everything you can to save them and you die, their positioning probably wasn't very good.
Yes.
Is it almost always better to use hard CC in an aggressive manner, i.e. to try to set up kills for your team rather than for peel?
Once again, these two things don't always have to be exclusionary, but I mean, ideally you'd like to. This is kind of an ideal world scenario. Obviously, you'd love to always use it in an aggressive manner, but sometimes you do have to use CC for peel. Like, I've blessed shielded for peel, and it doesn't feel terrible. Like, just depends on your team. Especially like especially if your team doesn't really need you to set up their damage very well. For example, like you get like a Raynor. Raynor doesn't have very many skill shots. You don't have to hold people still for his damage to land, and a slow is just as good. So if I Blessed Shield when the enemy goes on Raynor and then just slow them as they're walking out of Raynor's range, that's technically using my CC in an aggressive way. I just didn't need to stun them for the Raynor, so there's no point in holding them there. So ideal world, yes. What?
That's actually a good point, that like skill shots heroes need hard CC, but auto attack heroes soft CC is often as good at setting up their damage.
So I mean, play around it. Like if you have a Li Ming, yes, every CC should be used in aggressive manner one way or another, especially because she can protect herself very well. But Raynor, Vala, it's not always as important. So ideal world, yes, all CCs in aggressive manner, but it's not always going to happen. And sometimes you do have to use it. In the case of the Li Ming thing, if you have to Blessed Shield for peel, there's been a problem, and you probably have to wait 60 seconds before your team can do anything aggressive to begin with. Like, that's a worst case scenario for your team.
So this is actually more than one question. So we're going to take it in parts. How do you position to invade a camp? For example, the bottom sappers on Towers of Doom.
All right. Rules for invading a camp: 1, don't tank the camp. Like, make the enemy tank the camp, and if they're not tanking the camp, unless you have like 5 people to the enemy's 3, don't tank the camp. Or unless you can like one-shot the camp and it's already like 10 HP. Just don't tank the camp. The first thing. Okay, so going to the specific, say take the enemy bot sappers on sapper. If the enemy is already doing the camp, sit in the bush, make them tank it. And if you can hold them, if they get into kill range, you can kill them. Otherwise, make them tank it, harass them, keep them there, but don't tank the camp. You don't need to stand on the point until the point's actually capped. Then once it does, as the tank, your job is to stand on the point. Another thing I will often say here, and this is something many people mess up, invading the camp, the only way to don't always win it by capturing the camp. There's some times when it's actually correct to let the enemy overcommit to capturing the camp so you can trap them in and kill them instead. Many teams make this mistake, and they think everyone has to run onto the point and die for it, rather than just let the enemy have the camp and kill them when they step on the point and isolate themselves. This is especially true for like bosses. You'll see this, a really good example. Tomb of the Spider Queen, the top boss. Obviously, it's a much bigger camp than Pump Sappers, but you'll see teams that are smart, when the enemy team is doing the boss and it's close to death, rather than trying to get a person on the point, they will literally say, take the boss. We don't care. You're now all trapped in this terrible position to fight. And you know what? A 5-man team wipe is probably worth more than a boss anyways, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like, if you can get that situation.
The biggest things about this are try to avoid committing until you absolutely have to. Try to make the enemy commit, and if the enemy commits, punish that. If you're a tank and your team really does need to contest the point, for example, like Volskaya, capturing the point for like the heal camp actually is a lot of EXP. In those cases, fighting over the point and having someone stand on the point is very important. And so as the tank, that is your job. Stand on the point until you're about to die, then get off. That being said, for many of these camps in the game, I would honestly suggest trying to position such that the enemy team has to, if the enemy team commits more for the camp, literally just give them the camp or make them like step on it just to try and get the enemy team to step up, and then prioritize kills over the camp. Because especially if you're right there and can insta-clear the camp right after it finishes, the kills are worth more. Like 90% of the time. People heavily overvalue camps in this game.
It's true. Just having a Dahak on your team, and we can expand this, just having any global make a difference for camp invades, obviously. It kind of does, because you can force that fight a little bit harder.
Yeah. If you have an outnumber on the enemy team, the best way to do it is step on the point just to make the enemy team step to you, and then just look for the fight. Like, that's my advice for that one.
What about positioning tank for, specifically for taking the support camp on Volskaya, which you already talked about a little bit?
That is a very difficult point to fight, but the short of this one is, 1, don't tank the camp. Already said that. 2, as the tank, you unfortunately are responsible for standing on the point. That is just going to be a thing. If you are not the person that stands on the point, say you have like a Urel. Urel is really good at fighting this point because she can constantly knock people off it. So instead, let Urel do it, and instead where you want to be postured is above or below and looking to engage on the back line. Look to take the fight instead. But the best thing, if you have to stand on the point, the best thing to do is pick something like Murden or something that can get off it over the top side. Stand on the point until you're about to die, jump off and let someone else take over. Unfortunately, on the maps, like on those maps, capturing the point is huge. And so you do unfortunately have to prioritize the point over the fight in some cases.
I think in an ideal world, a tank would want to be in that little bush or vent just below the support camp, and your team pulls the support camp off to one side.
Oh yeah.
And then you're ready to go on the point when it dies.
I don't even like that vent, because unless you have a jump, you can get trapped there very easily. I'd say either below that wall or above that top wall. Above the top wall, probably better.
Okay.
Like you need to be able to get out if the enemy engages on you early.
And this isn't even really. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, the other thing to think of, if your team's pulled the thing back, like they're not ready to support you. So if you get gone on that vent, you're just dead. Rip friend.
And this question is actually very different. It's not even related to the previous ones, but it's in the same subcategory for some reason. Which target on the enemy team do you call to focus? And the correct answer is always the one that's out of position.
Yes and no. The best answer is whichever one your team can hit, which is also the target that's out of position usually. I need to post this article too. I've been thinking about this ever since playing another game. But the short of it is there's like a hierarchy of like who to choose when to focus, and the highest thing on that list is my team can all hit them. The thing below that is like they're a priority target, or not even they're a priority. I don't even remember my list. I'd have to look it up for it. The short of it basically is who to choose, who to focus is, can your team hit them? Yeah, and like if so, go for it. Like, is the person low? And like, can the people currently hitting them kill them? All right, go for that. Kills are worth a decent amount. Like, then there's like, is it a priority target and stuff like that? So it's like, if your whole team can hit one of 2 targets, choose the more priority target. But if your whole team can only hit 1 target, and that target isn't like de-shielded or clearly not going to die to focus that target. Especially as a tank, hitting the same thing your team can hit will get you so much more value than trying to solo kill squishies just because the squishy is higher focus. So, yeah.
I mean, this is why in competitive it's always the tank that's getting focused, because people have good positioning. You can't actually focus anyone else. You actually don't have a choice. You have to focus the tank, which is totally fine. Focus whoever your team can all focus together safely.
Yeah.
It's usually you won't have more than one choice anyway. So.
Yeah, very, very true. I don't know, just don't feel like you always have to go on the backliner when no one on your team can follow up. In those cases, like, even if you're going to threaten them, don't overcommit, always be ready to get out. Threaten them more as like a attempt to scare them than I can actually solo kill his target. Unless you are Diablo. You know.
Diablo keeps working its way in this conversation.
Diablo is just such a unique existence in tanks, as a tank that does damage and makes ranged players rage quit.
So this is a general question, but there's a specific example with it, and I think if we answer the example, we can answer the thought process. So peel the tank bruiser or prevent the follow-up from the enemy DPS. For example, enemy Murden and Urel together jump on your backline, and your Johanna standing in the middle of both teams with all abilities up. Do you try to get on the damage and prevent the damage follow-up from the Murden to help the Murden Urel, or do you go straight to the Murden Urel's Johanna?
Ideally, because Johanna's kit, you can split your abilities 50-50 between the two of them, frankly. The basic idea here is prevent any follow-up, because Murden and Urel are not going to one-shot a backliner. Like, unless Murden has 20,000 stacks of Perfect Storm, your backliner is going to live at least for a few seconds, and if your support's doing their job, those two by themselves should not be able to kill the backliner. If you really feel like your person's unsafe, throw a blind back there. Or depending on the enemy's damage type, maybe throw a blind onto the enemy's damage, walk back, and then WQ. So basically, like, blind does a lot against Urel Murden because they have very high auto attack damage. Murden with his skill on the axe, and Urel with just high base damage. If the enemy is like all mage damage, like, don't blind them. Like, not worth your time. Blind the Murden Urel, then walk up, WQ the backline to prevent them from following up, and then just Iron Skin and walk out of there. If the enemy team is like Raynor or Vala, and they're going to be hitting you more than they're going to hit the your person who got like jumped on, because they're like shorter range auto attack carries, blind those, peel back, WQ the Murden Urel, and then just walk out with your team. Either way, your number one, like, the big thing here is, like, you don't necessarily, this is a case where you can 100% split your thing, and unless your team is capable of one-shotting the Urel Murden, which I'm assuming if they jumped in together, your team is not in position to kill them off of a Blessed. Probably don't commit your Blessed shield until you get to a point where your team is ready to turn on that target, is probably the best way. Unless 100% necessary, for example, say Murd and Urel both jump onto like your medic, and your medic is completely screwed unless you Blessed shield. That's an extreme case, and your medic probably messed up then. And you're playing medic, which means you messed up. So
it's one of the reasons Morales is not meta. But the basic thought process there is you want to be efficient with your abilities across all cases, and you have to realistically assess what are the odds that a kill happens. The odds are low, or you can do something specific to prevent the kill, especially if it involves not burning your R, do that. That's going to apply across every tank. Just don't let people on your team die if you can stop it.
Yep.
Again, really hard questions. How do you go about regaining map control? For example, the enemy got a couple of picks early, and they are in complete control of the rotation and the vision between the lanes. How do you go about taking it back?
Assuming map control is primarily a tank's job. Wrong on that assumption. Map control is nice for tank, but guess what? You can't get map control if your team's not behind you. So, map control is actually not the tank's job, but rather the wave clear's job, because they need to make space for the tank to get back in. So, if you are getting picked or your team has lost control of map, step one, always, stop dying. Whatever it takes, stop the chain picks, get 5 players on the map, then start doing your thing. Okay, so once you've done that, usually the next step is don't try to rotate immediately. Don't try to regain rotational pressure yet. Put usually one person to a lane, clear the waves that are hitting, and once all waves are cleared, look to regroup your 4-man. Do so whatever safe methods you need to. Once you can do that, you can put your 4-man back together. Your 4-man will put pressure back on, which will allow your tank to get in bushes and regain vision. And once you've gotten back that, you have fully reset. So step 1, don't die. Step 2, safe soak waves. Make sure you don't miss anything in the time. Like, make sure all waves are being soaked. Step 3, only once waves have been cleared and your team doesn't have an immediate thing they have to answer, regroup your 4-man and try to push back out as a group.
It's something I think people struggle with even when they don't die. Like people will draft they'll try to do 4-man rotation on Tomb of the Spider Queen, and an enemy team will interrupt their rotation, so it gets slowed down. They're like, we want to stay together as 4, but we're missing soak. Reestablish your 4-man. Sometimes that can mean splitting one person off to make sure something gets caught. Yeah. You can do like a 1-3-1 for a second, but then everyone's alive, waves are cleared, reestablish the 4-man, and then go from there.
The best, like, taking the Tomb of Spider Queen, if you've lost someone or you have gotten cut off from your 4-man, the best thing you can do is stop trying to 4-man for 1 second, put people to the lanes, even hard clear top if the enemy is 4-man and you have enough wave clear to manage it, or just let it crash top. There's 30 seconds between waves. Get those 2 waves answered, don't try to rotate because you'll probably die doing so. Then get your people to safe rotate it back around and reestablish your 4-man again. That's the best way to handle it. Unless, of course, you have like such a bad 4-man that it's literally happening every time, in which case abandon the 4-man, pick a different strategy. But that's a different conversation.
And if you want to see a good example of this, ishb00 actually has a tanking video of himself playing a Nubrak on his YouTube, where early game he actually goes over that exact scenario, and it was a early game where he had to reestablish the 4-man and someone had to catch the top lane. How do you go about thinking about vision control? Is the enemy tank your primary target to keep in vision? How many risks are you ready to take to provide vision? This is all about vision.
No risks. Vision is not a risk thing. Know your limits, and you'll know you'll know what risks are. If you are at all risk doing your vision and you're not either desperate because you're behind, or too actively like trying to make a play which you think there's a higher reward than risk, you shouldn't be doing standing where you are. If you're a Diablo at level 4, standing in the enemy on Towers of Doom, watching them take the camp, and your team is not about to engage, just leave. You've seen them already. Leave. Don't die. Don't risk not getting souls before your level 7 spike. Like, know your limits, because like when he puts it down, like a Muradin standing super far on the enemy side of the bush might not actually be as much of a risk as you think, because the character is so safe. Whereas it might be a risk on something like Garrosh or Diablo. So you shouldn't be taking very many risks. 2, who am I looking for? I'm just looking for what is the enemy literally doing right now. The enemy should always have some objective, whether it be ganking, taking a camp, maybe they're just a 4-man pushing a wave. Literally just try to figure out what the enemy is doing, even if you don't see the enemy tank, or say you don't, based on where one enemy is positioning, you can honestly tell what the rest of their team is doing, unless the enemy team is really, really discoordinated and stupid, in which case you're probably fine whether you see them or not. But the short of it is like, okay, Cursed Hollow, here's a good example that happened to me recently in an HL game. Cursed Hollow, we didn't see 3 of the enemies. I started realizing, okay, the enemy has a good boss composition. I'm going to start walking towards their boss. The enemy tank was soaking mid lane at the time, but when I started walking up, he immediately moved to dismount me and keep me off and keep me from going top. So I was like, oh, okay. He doesn't want me going to check their boss. This should mean that their other 3 members that we don't see are most likely on boss. So with this knowledge of what I do know, I can then infer what I don't. And it's the same thing for a lot of other things. If you see an enemy somewhere, you know they can't be somewhere else. But also, if you know someone's not where you are, if you have full vision of your area, you know that they must be somewhere else. So if I am bot and I know for a fact I've checked all bushes that there is no Genji, I'm going to ping vigorously to my solo laner, hi, there's no Genji here. You're probably getting ganked. Please play safely for the next little bit. So it really doesn't, like, I don't look for anyone specific as much as I try to look for what the enemy's goal is. And I think you'll find the more you play the game, the better you'll get a sense of, by seeing any one member, you can infer what the other members are doing.
And does that change at all if the enemy team has an anti-tank comp specifically? For instance, Garrosh Kharazim or Jaina Tychus?
Remember when I said don't take risks?
Yeah.
Know what the enemy can kill you with. If the enemy can kill you, one of the things I've taken to in competitive is, if I know the enemy can kill me and I need a cleanse, I will literally call to BBJ, I need someone on me before I check this bush. And if he can't be behind me, I don't check that bush. End of sentence. It's really useful when you have something like a Malfurion where you can kind of do it remotely. Like I'll say like Malf heal me, and I'll call for cleanse, and then I'll walk like half a screen away, and if they go on me, I'll call for cleanse, and then I'll be able to get out. A little harder, but yeah, if enemy team can kill you, don't go blind checking bushes without your team. Just it's okay to ask for your team's help to get vision. You also find that when the enemy has a tank killing comp, here's a unique little tip here though. When the enemy has a tank killing comp, it's usually because their 4-man has to stay together. If their team is not together, they can no longer kill you. When they do that, you can get vision. But if the enemy team is as a 4-man, that's a case where like, okay, the enemy team is a 4-man. They're not soaking mid on Towers of Doom. They're not soaking bot on Towers of Doom. They're probably doing sappers. Because they're together, I can't check to confirm, but until the enemy shows and I have vision of these two sides, I'm just going to assume they're there. So there are some safe assumptions you can do, but these tank killing comps very often like to stick as a group. And so it's a lot easier to tell where one is from. Like, they'll either be mid together, or they'll be bot together, or doing an objective together. There's very little split, and if they do start to split, then you can start soaking, because once they split, they no longer have that killing pressure on you. They usually have to kill you as a 4-man.
When Vikings were meta, there was a really simple rule. If you saw anyone that wasn't a Viking, that was where their whole team was. So
Agreed.
Identify the combinations of people that are going to move around, and a lot of time one person shows that's actually far more revealing than you might otherwise think.
Agreed.
How do you go about playing from behind as a tank, especially in the late game? It's kind of a weird question, because he follows, if your team is trying to soak every lane to catch up, is it more important for the tank to keep their lane safe, i.e. control vision of the flanks, or to soak themselves?
Okay, this is a very situation by situation question, to be honest. Obviously, soak very important when you're trying to catch up, but there's some cases where soak will not catch you up. Not to mention there's some cases where the enemy team has just a straight up win con that you have to respect. Let's say you're playing Tomb of the Spider Queen, because that's a map where it's very easy to soak 3 waves when you're behind. The thing is, though, if the enemy team has the gems for turn-in, or is approaching gems for turn-in, and that turn-in's going to get value, you don't have like Ragnaros Asmodan Kael'thas or something ridiculous like that, which I've seen worse in HL, I'm not gonna lie. You kind of can't just soak out. Like, there isn't that option. The enemy team is going to just... If the enemy turn-in is going to win them the game or put them in a position to snowball further lead, you can't just sit back and let them do that. So in those cases, the best thing you can do as a tank is be unpredictable. Take weird routes, take an extra couple seconds on your route, try to stand in bushes, try to say, what is the enemy team's win con? Let's say the enemy team has 60 gems, and one person on our team is dead, but 40 of their gems are on one person, and boss is up, and we haven't seen them for a bit. Alright, well, most likely what they're trying to do is a boss turn-in, right? That's a very common thing in competitive play. A little harder to do in HL, but if you can boss turn-in, that actually usually wins the game by itself, or at least puts you in a very winning position, right? So, as a tank, you have a couple options. You can engage 4v5 or 4v4 onto their 5-man and top boss, or there's a couple other fun things you can actually do. One of the cool things is, a lot of times when people do this, what they'll do is they'll try to leave that one split soaker, especially the person who has their gems. They'll try to have them like turn in while their team is doing boss if they feel very safe, or they'll have them trying to push the other waves. If the enemy team isn't as 5-man, this means even though your team is in a really disadvantageous position, you need to be on the map looking for that person, and ideally in such a way that that they don't see you. Which means it is a completely legitimate strategy in this case to literally just be sitting in one of the bushes by turn-in, hoping the enemy team checks you, or the enemy solo person checks you, or that they undercommit. Hell, even if the enemy team captures the boss, and they only have one person for turn-in, very often what the enemy team will do is 4 people will go up to push the boss, and that one person will go to the turn-in. And you can threaten that one person if your whole team is just sitting in the bush. You can kill 4 people can kill 1, doesn't matter. So the short of this is, obviously, soak every lane if the enemy team is not currently on a path to win the game that you need to prevent. And that is something that does happen a lot of the time. Not to mention in HL, people very often throw these things. It's very rare you see a proper boss turn-in in HL, and heck, even some competitive games, let's be honest. But the short of it is determine whether you can get back in the game by playing safe. If you're about to hit a talent tier, play safe. If you have people dead and can't make an aggressive move because, say, your main damage is dead, play safe and soak. Enemy team has nothing that they like on the map that they can immediately pressure. They don't have the gems for turn and bosses down. Play safe and soak for a little bit. Get at least a little bit of map control before. Determine basically when you need to be desperate, and when you need to be desperate, the best thing you can be is unpredictable. So that's the short of that, and that's where like the truly great tanks shine. Like players like Sign really know how to be exactly where you expect them not to be. That's a really big thing Korean tanks do, and it's one of the reasons they get so many like random comeback 5-man moshes and insane stuff like that.
It's a really good answer, and I absolutely agree on every point. So I don't even think I have anything to add. How do you go about timing and forcing an even talent tier fight in a narrow window? So like you're losing and you get like 16 to 19. How do you force that fight? And I think the answer is the same. You just have to be unpredictable, because the enemy team, if they're playing correctly, is going to be like, no, we'd rather wait till 20, or whatever the next advantage they have is.
Yeah. The two options are, as you said, be unpredictable or start engaging the fight before, or position to engage the fight before that window happens. Say your team's like 15 and the enemy team's like about to hit 19. If you know you're about to get 16 from passive EXP, stop soaking, go off map, look for the engage right now. But like even before you hit the 16 number, you'll probably get it right before the fight. And provided you're a good player, you'll be able to talent your thing right before the fight. Like very important skill as an HL player, as a player at any level. Talent the second you get your talent tier, unless you really need to think about something or you have a very good reason to hold it. I see so many fights happen where a team hits 16, fights, loses, says, how did we lose a 16-15 fight? And then I look through and 3 of the players haven't taken their tiers.
Yeah, having a talent tier advantage doesn't actually exist if you don't actually pick the talent. That's not the way that works.
Don't be that guy. Anyways, but yeah, the two options, as he said, be unpredictable, be where the enemy won't expect you to be, or do something a little bit crazy, or start setting it up before the talent tier actually exists, and you'll often catch people off guard.
How important is lane/minion management to set up your rotations and engages? How do you communicate to your team? How do you communicate to your team to enable you in that respect?
It's a bit of a weird question. Not 100% sure how to answer this. Obviously, if stuff is pushed, you have more vision on map. Your enemy is forced to respond to certain things. So that's obviously nice. Also, there's freezes, especially in the off lane. If your offlaner freezes the top wave, it means the enemy team is very gankable position. I mean, there's a lot of little things with minion management, but especially in the 4-man, like 90% of it literally comes down to just push the wave. And if you push the wave, you have more pressure on map. If you have more pressure on map, you can then turn that pressure into either ganking or taking camps when the enemy doesn't have vision of you. That's a lot of it. There is a little bit more in depth with that, but it's one, harder to apply in HL, and two, honestly still being explored even at the competitive level. I think a lot of competitive players even are only just starting to kind of scratch the surface with what you can do with minion management personally.
I would agree. There's all sorts of things that just haven't even... Like, I think it was only like 2 weeks ago, Void Insanity, who is a Monkey's Samuro coach, and he's a Samuro one-trick in EU, had developed new minion management tech for Samuro with things you can do with the gloves. You can go watch a stream, he can explain it to you, but people are just figuring a lot of these interesting tactics out. So, but I think the basic idea is, if you're protecting your team, the wave needs to be cleared, and then you all rotate together. Yeah. So your rotations are all dictated by how good your wave clear is. That's what you should be focusing on.
I mean, once a wave is pushed, the enemy team has to respond to that wave, and you no longer have to, which gives you freedom. Freedom lets you set up plays or take camps or get vision. So more wave clear means more freedom as a tank. Less wave clear means less freedom as a rotation as a tank. If your team really struggles in wave clear, often you can't even rotate. You have to like put one person to a lane, and then at that point your job as a tank is literally just vision. Just keep your 2 people safe. But a lot of the game right now is really just dictated on pushing and then using that to get control of the map. So I don't really know how much to say about that, except for like offlane obviously has some more minion management than the 4-man, but 4-man is mostly just push and go.
What do you look for when evaluating yourself when watching your own replays?
I mean, I suck, so I don't know what else to. I am a very harsh critic of myself, but it changes based on what I'm trying to work on. Right now, the biggest thing I'm trying to work on is creativity, as weird as that sounds. Well, two things, creativity and aggression. I try to look for where was a case where I could have done something that would have resulted positive, but I didn't because I didn't see the moment. Like I mentioned it early on, there are lots of times where as a tank, like if your team is ready for it, if you stun, even a full health Diablo will die. So you need to know the difference between when that is and when that isn't. So you can kind of just look through the game and see those moments, see like, oh, maybe had I done something here it was a kill, or in other cases like, okay, my team wasn't set up, so this was correct for me to not go for this here. Then as far as the creativity thing, like I realized this after mid-season brawl, but a lot of these more experienced tanks, like I mentioned Sign because he completely. There was a play when we lost to Tempest on Sky Temple, where I was wondering like, how did he get there? Like, how did I get caught here? I wasn't 100% paying attention, so I rewatched the replay, and I was sitting at my bot fort while my team was doing the bottom giants in the bottom left, and Cyan on Garrosh literally mounted up, rode all the way through the bushes on the bottom temple, went through the bottom temple when it wasn't active, went into those left side bushes of the temple, came out of the bushes right below me, unstoppable with my W as ETC, throw taunted me, and I died. It took him an extra 5 to 7 seconds to do that whole rotation, but he did it in such a way that I had no idea where he was. And I, frankly, didn't have a ton of counterplay. And it was all because he took this extra time to make this more creative rotation. So I think, personally, there's a lot of things I focused on, like, in learning the role, especially the basics. Right now, though, I am at a point where I'm trying to focus on playing against these top-tier tanks. As I said, I always thought EU and Korea have had fantastic tank players. And I feel like one of the big things separating me from these plays is that that little aspect of unpredictability. I feel like I'm way too straightforward in my personal play, so that's what I'm currently watching for. But it does change, honestly, week to week or even season to season. It's just, what do I need to improve on to catch up to the other people that I'm playing against? And when I was playing against NA players, it was like when I was just first introduced into the HGC, it was a lot of basics. It was a lot of using my CC efficiently. It was a lot of cooldown management, a lot of positioning, a lot of visioning. But now that I'm getting closer to this world stage, like, I need to figure out, like, I've gotten a lot of those things down. I need to figure out what separates those players from me right now, and that's where I'm trying to improve. And so that's where I'm at.
It's a really good answer. It's like a BlizzCon level answer, as opposed to like a tank show level answer. A lot of good insight into what is going to go on with HEG at BlizzCon there, I think, based on how that, at least how ishb00 is approaching it. And that'll be it. I think that's the last of the viewer questions. We made it. We got through them all. Thank you so much, ishb00.
You gave us quite the marathon.
Hope you all enjoyed this episode with ishb00 and Cavalier about tanking. ishb00, I want to personally thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Well, one thing is for sure, you're a very knowledgeable and talkative person. I'm sure that if we had another hour, you could have filled it without a problem.
1 hour, give me 24.
Alright, fantastic. Cav, thank you so much for joining me yet again and for setting this up as well. Is there something you want to say to the viewers, the two of you, before we finish off?
Not for me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I sort of made a name for myself almost 3 years ago now, writing the first like pro tanking guide, and being able to sit down with a professional tank player and talk about it for all of you guys has been amazing, and ishb00 has been wonderful. So thank you, ishb00, for coming on.
Yeah, no, and my part's a couple different things, but first one is just, it's been my pleasure being on the show. Thank you all for tuning in, as well as thank you all for putting on this show. I gotta give the customary shout out to HeroesHearth right here, you know. Well, I gotta stretch out the Heroes. Okay, it's upside down, but you get the point. HeroesHearth. If you do want to get any follow-up information or see any of the stuff I personally put out, go to HeroesHearth.com. You can also check out my streams, because I do stream now. I try to stream roughly twice a week, and I have a lot of VODs for those who can't catch them live. Outside of that, I guess it's just stay classy and keep on tanking.
I'm gonna endorse ishb00 stream actually, and I told him this the other day when I was in chat. He doesn't read chat during games, but because he's explaining his decision making constantly, he doesn't need to, because all the questions people ask in chat when they're going to a tank main stream are, why are you doing this? And he's already answering it because he's already talking about what he's doing. So if you're actually wanting to learn to tank, ishb00 is a great stream to watch because he's constantly talking about his decision making as the game goes along.
Yeah, at least I can speak for myself when I said it. I learned a lot about engaging, counter-engaging, and counter-engaging, which is something I heard for the first time here. So I'm glad I at least learned that. Anyways, ladies, gentlemen, sloths and alike, I hope you enjoyed this segment with ishb00 and Cavalier about tanking. I've been Heartless. I'll see you guys next time.